Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everybody to our Provo Municipal Council work session. Today is Tuesday, May 17th, 2022. It is 12:04 p.m. Members of the public can view council meetings on YouTube and Facebook, or they may attend in person in the council chamber at the Provo City Center. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. I am joined, my name is George Handley, I'm Vice Chair. I am joined today on the stand by Wayne Parker, Chief Administrative Officer, Councillor McKay, Councillor Whipple, Councillor Shipley, Brian Jones, City Attorney, and John Magnus, our Interim Executive Director. And we are joined online by Bill Fillmore, Councillor Bill Fillmore, and I believe Travis Hoban and Shannon Ellsworth will be joining us at a later point. So they're excused for the moment. We have invited Dixon Holmes, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer, to offer an opening prayer.
Our dear friend, Heavenly Father, we are thankful for the opportunity to be gathered in this council work session. Pray thy Spirit upon us, that as the council, and those that are online and are public, are considered spirit of cooperation, questioning, doing what's best for our residents.
We are mindful that there are many who are suffering at this time, either here or abroad, and pray thy comfort upon them. We are thankful for the blessings that thou hast given us and pray that we might use the resources for which we have to better the lives of those in which we have stewardship. And those we ask and pray in the name of thy Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. We welcome the Mayor, Mayor Kafusi, and Deputy Mayor Isaac Paxman, who are joining us. It is proposed we approve the following minutes: March 29th, 2022 council meeting minutes, April 19th, 2022 council meeting minutes, and May 10th, 2022 budget work meeting minutes. Are there any objections or requested changes? Seeing no objection, I declare the minutes approved by unanimous consent. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the council may speak or ask questions. Unless otherwise invited by the chair, please wait to speak until called on by the chair. So we'll begin with our first item, a presentation regarding the effects of fiscal year 23 airport budget with new air carrier planes and routes. This will be presented by Dave Decker, Public Works Director, and John Borgett, Administrative Services Director. We have 30 minutes for this item.
Thank you, Mr. Hanley, and thank you for the opportunity to make this presentation. And I appreciate the entire council and the administration, their willingness to address a couple of questions. I need to tell the council before we start the presentation. Council staff came to Public Works a week or so ago, maybe a little bit longer, and indicated there were some specific questions that either the council or they were coming up with in their review of the budget. And so our intent in this presentation is to clarify some of the aspects of the budget. And there were really three questions that were specifically given to Public Works to try to address today, and I'll cover those three questions in just a second, but I want to encourage, if there are other questions, if we've misunderstood the questions, or if there's additional questions that pop up either during the presentation or after the presentation, please feel free to ask the questions. We're certainly, if we don't have the information, we'll find the information and respond back to the council on this particular item. I also, before I get too far into this presentation, I want to mention a couple of things that are happening with the airport. I think most of the council is aware of the events that happened about a week ago. We had a number of open houses and a number of events. We have been contacted and asked through the administration to do another open house, a public open house this coming Thursday. So if you're not aware of that, you're certainly welcome to attend or have family members, neighbors. I want to make sure that the council staff knows about that event. It's scheduled for this coming Thursday from 6 to 8 at the airport. We're also trying to get word out through, we have some public works presentations at a couple of elementary schools this week. And so we're actually handing out information at the elementary schools relative to that open house. So we're trying to get the word out fairly quickly. It's a bit of a, this was not anticipated, but we had such a response at the public open houses that we felt like we needed to respond when we got this request to do another open house. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that that is happening this Thursday. Let me acknowledge a couple of people before before we dive into the presentation. Brian Torgerson, who's the interim airport manager right now, he's present here, should be able to answer a lot of the questions that you might have. Jimmy McKnight joins me. He's spent a lot of time on the presentation, and there's quite a bit of information relative to the questions that are financially related. And Jimmy spent a lot of time preparing this, and I appreciate his help. So let me tell you the three questions that we've been primarily asked to focus on in this presentation. And again, this has come from the council staff. There's been questions about revenue, details about the revenue. And this slide that's up right now, this is a summary of the presentation that was given on the airport some time ago, a couple of weeks ago. We gave this presentation. And this is the same slide. A couple of the numbers have been adjusted. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But the first question is the detail about the revenues coming into the airport. The second question that we've been asked to address today is staffing levels and why the staffing levels are being recommended where they're at. And the third question is relative to the general fund subsidy, how much is happening this year, the likelihood of that decreasing in the coming years, and just trying to give the council a little perspective about the anticipated growth at the airport. So those are really the three primary questions that we're trying to address today. And again, if there's other questions or if we've misunderstood the questions that the council has, please feel free to ask the questions during the presentation, and we'll get some clarification. So let me back up here just to this slide again that's up. I'm hoping all the council members can see this slide and remember from the airport presentation a couple of weeks ago. One of the points that we made is, and I apologize for pointing at the screen behind you, but over on the right-hand side in fiscal year 23, second row down is the transfer from other funds, and that is the transfer from the general fund. And if you recall in the previous slide, it was nearly $950,000 in the previous slide. Jimmy, along with working with John Borgen and a number of financial people in the finance department, they've refined that number a little bit as we go through a little bit more of the budget process, chargebacks, and some other things are refined. And so the number that you're seeing today, $894,000, is a refined number. It's a little bit lower than what we had projected previously, but that's the significant change here in this slide. And we're going to come back and talk. Again, the third question is about general fund subsidy and the likelihood of that continuing into future years and what that might look like. This is also from the previous presentation. This next slide that's up, this is a reminder for the council to, as we go through revenue, obviously changes in fees are going to generate some of the revenue. And so I just wanted to bring this slide up, remind the council there's a number of fee changes that are going to happen at the airport, and we'll come back. We're going to flip back to this slide during the presentation to remind the council. And again, if there's questions on this, I'm happy to go over some details on this. But this is the same slide from the previous presentation. This third slide, it is a new slide that we've added with some detail on revenue. And we've taken the fees that you saw on the second slide and we're starting to put some detailed information for the council. Over on the far right-hand side, you can see fiscal year 23, that's the budget information. And you can see the total at the bottom is about $2.3 million. And that's where the revenue is shown on slide 1 in the presentation. But you can see over on the left-hand side, you can see the different fees, and you can see some of the fees that are new are listed at the bottom of this. And so that's why they don't have a historical record. So you can see we've gone back into fiscal year 18, 19, and 20. And we've shown actual fees in each of these categories for the council to look at. And again, we're happy to make this available. If you want this either hard copy or electronically, we're happy to provide this information to the council. But you can see it's a good historical record of these different categories over the last 3 or 4 fiscal years, and then what we're projecting into the current or the coming fiscal year 23. And whether that helps or generates more questions, why some of these fees are bumping up. So I'm happy to go through these, at least a couple of them in detail. And if there's others that you might have some questions on, I'd be happy to go through each category. So the fees.
Just a moment, please.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead, Councillor McKay.
I think we both have questions, but I got my name called first. Curious why, I mean, we're raising some of the fees, but we're budgeting in 23 less on fees than what is actual as of right now for 22.
So you're right. And that's why I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the details on these. And I think overall, let me respond in general to your question first is we're trying to budget in what I would call a relatively conservative manner. Some of these fees, probably you'd say, hey, there's a good likelihood that you're going to generate more revenue at the airport in some of these areas. But it's a lot easier for me to come back and say, hey, we're doing a lot better than what we had anticipated at the airport. And that's why I wanted to spend a little bit of detail, going through some of these fees. But I think in general, we've tried to be relatively conservative in the fee estimations.
Okay.
There's a few that could go higher.
I have noticed, I think this is probably a John question, but that seems to be a general philosophy in our budgeting, right? That it's better to be conservative and not get in trouble at the end. And extra is always nice if it fills in other gaps. Okay.
And one of the things that we're happy to do if the council's interested, if I have a report with me and I should have brought it up. Jimmy McKnight, every month, he produces a report for Public Works to review, and it has this kind of detail, and it goes through every fee at the airport based on the monthly revenue. And then he's projecting into the rest of the fiscal year, he projects using last year's numbers. And it's a good report. And if the council is interested in getting a quarterly review of that report or some kind of a summary, so you can kind of see in the coming fiscal year, how are things going financially at the airport? That's a report we're happy to provide to the council.
We love reports. One more question.
Okay.
In regards then to budgeting, like in our formula, do we automatically look at like the last year's budget and then look at the actuals and kind of even decrease from that? Like, is that like built into our formula? A certain percentage that we downplay, so to speak? Yeah.
You're okay.
So you're
Sorry.
talking about based on revenue estimation.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we do is we look at, first of all, when we have experts in our enterprise funds, particularly like Jimmy and Dave and Brian, we try to rely on them because they're closer and they have a better feel for what's happening. But what we do on a citywide project basis for sales tax and other revenue, we look at the current year and see how we're running this year. We look at the last 3 years and see what the trend is. And then we try to make our estimation based on those. But we also try, just like Dave Decker just mentioned, if we're going to be on the conservative side or the over optimistic side, we try to be a little bit conservative, but we don't want to have our our head in the mud and just be so conservative that it's crazy, but there's a fine balance there and we try to find that.
But we don't have a set percentage that we customarily are conservative by, like it's not a set program. Okay.
No, it's based more on trends and the factors that are behind. I mean, each
So it's not
revenue
consistent.
has its own story.
It's not
you know.
consistent across the board.
Yeah, but I feel like we do a pretty good job. And you can also use what's called regression analysis. And, a lot of times that can be done, particularly with larger corporations, to try to statistically expect at what's going to happen. But it's interesting to know that even with that kind of analysis, they're wrong all the time. And so our tendency has been, let's rely on the experts.
Mhm.
Let's look at our trends and then go based on that.
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry to.
Counselor Whipple?
Yes, so I'm trying to cross-reference this with the airport fund page in my budget book, which maybe I don't yet know enough to do this. I can see where certain things appear to line up and match, but I don't see how all of these numbers match up. So maybe I need remedial help on this, but I
don't think so.
Okay, so I would imagine that a lot of these things fall into the category of charges for services in this budget book, but not all of them do. I can see property tax revenue, the lease. I'm assuming that the miscellaneous is the MISC revenue, so those would match up. What's the utilities revenue? Is that the state tax?
Jimmy, do you know? He's
Sorry.
If I can suggest one thing, Jimmy can get with Kelsey. Kelsey's one of the main people in finance that puts the budget book together.
Amazing.
Those two individuals can tie these numbers together for you, and probably in an email, and we can send it out to the entire council. They can kind of explain how this transfers, this information that's up on the screen transfers to the budget book.
Okay, that would be really helpful, because while I can see where some of these numbers match up, I don't see that the revenues totals match up, so that's why I'm trying to figure out where I'm getting lost and where you're putting in numbers here that are not in this book.
And to be honest, Public Works, I mean, the budget was just barely presented to the council. What was it, a week ago? And so Public Works hasn't had a chance to dive into the budget presentation as it's come to the council yet either. And so that's why I'm suggesting Jimmy and Kelsey can get on the same page and kind of look at both pages, point to, different numbers and say, here's how this number in the budget book corresponds to the information from Public Works.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
So that's what I would suggest, if that's okay. So let me go back a couple of things that stick out on this page. And again, I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this page so some of the questions can be answered. The fees that are the third line down on the sheet that's up here right now, there's two primary revenues that are shown in these fees, and that's the hangar and the ground lease fee. And you can see, as was pointed out earlier, in the current fiscal year, in fiscal year 22, the actual dollars not only exceed the budget amount, but they exceed what we're projecting in 23. And if you go back to the previous slide, we're actually recommending some increases in these areas. And so again, we're being relatively conservative, and the likelihood is that we're going to generate probably a little bit more revenue than what we're anticipating here. But again, as John pointed out, I think that's generally the trend. Let me point out also the passenger / terminal fees. It's the fifth line down on this particular slide. You can see in this case, we're running in the 50 to 60,000 range over the historical. This particular year, we're almost at 75,000. And yet in the coming fiscal year, we're projecting a significant increase, 195,000. So this is one that jumps significantly. And the reason being, if you go back to this page right here and you look at, which line is it? The fees.
Terminal fees?
Yep, the terminal fees. What is it? The third bullet point down, terminal fees are going from 75 cents right now to $1.83. That's the reason for the jump. And we start looking at projected passengers that are coming in. And I think all the council is aware that we have a new airline that's coming that's announced several new destinations. That all transfers into additional passengers. And so that's partly the reason for that jump in that particular area. Please.
So back to that previous slide there, where we have all of these recommended fee changes. Were these known to Breeze and Allegiant before they went ahead and signed on? So that won't be a problem.
Yes.
Thank you.
They are very much aware of it. So let me just go down again. I'm going to touch just briefly on parking. It's what, 2/3 of the way, a little bit more than halfway down the list. Parking is another big revenue generator. And again, look historically across it. And we're going to talk just briefly about, and I'll come back to this page if you want to look at it, but some detail about parking. It's one of the big generators of revenue at the airport. So our parking at the old terminal has about 340, a little bit more than 340 spaces. The new parking lot, just a tad over 500. We're actually adding some additional temporary parking. We've already had comments from both airlines that they feel like we're going to need some additional parking. And you'll notice in one of the later slides, that's actually one of the next steps that we've identified. Almost immediately, we knew that was going to be a need. And so, go ahead.
And do we already have the land for that?
We do. Yep, we're actually working on it already. In fact, Brian probably will tell me it's close, if not completed. It's pretty close. He's working on it.
And are you also working on having bike lockers?
So we do have, there was a question that was asked about bike parking. We do have a place for bikes to be parked. Now, when you get into the bike lockers, that's a physical enclosed box. We do not have bike lockers, but we do have a place for bikes to be locked and stored.
Yeah, because if I'm going away for a week, I would feel much better leaving my bike in a locked box than I would just with a U-lock.
So that is a question. And again, that was raised, that's not the first time that I've heard that question. And so that is a question for the council to consider if they want us to move that direction. It's probably something that we need to fund in the upcoming budget and identify a location for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's, as far as I'm concerned, part of parking. But I'm one of those people who uses my bike as a primary form of transportation. So I'm not everybody, but lots of us.
So a little bit more, again, I'm trying to help the council understand why we're budgeting, where we're budgeting for parking. A couple of notes to make. So in order to generate the $600,000 that we're putting in the budget in fiscal year 23, about a third of the lot would need to be filled 365 days of the year. Now, obviously, that's not going to happen. We have, with our flight schedule, you don't always have a third of the lot filled. But you need to realize, from a balance and from a budget standpoint, is that a good perspective, to look at? Is that a reasonable number to budget? And we think it's relatively conservative and probably the appropriate level to balance at. You can see if the lot is entirely full, the 508 spaces, if they were filled 365 days a year, it would generate $1.8 million. And again, that's not going to happen. But again, we're trying to balance out new flights, new passengers, how much of that lot is going to be filled. And we think that that's the appropriate number. The next 4 slides in this presentation, again, I'll be happy to go back into the revenue if you have more detail. The next 4 slides set the foundation for revenue and also the last question relative to general fund subsidies. So we've actually taken the 4 slides that you're going to see out of a study from the Meehan Group. You can see the consultant that's down in the lower right-hand corner. We've actually given this study. This is one of the completed studies for the airport recently. We sent this to the council staff and asked the council staff to send this out today, if possible, to the council. So this is available for your review. And again, just a couple of slides. You can see the consultant spent a little bit of time summarizing both Allegiant and Breeze Airlines, their destinations that they've recently announced. And the fact that they're basing aircraft, in both cases, they're basing aircraft here. And the revenue that that generates, not necessarily all of it directly to the airport, there are some indirect benefit to Provo and the surrounding area because of job creations. And so that's an important element as we answer particularly the last question. The third, or excuse me, this next slide, again, out of their presentation, it's a quick summary in map form of the destinations and where they're going. And you can see the two different airlines and spreading out. And you can see, where their demand for Provo residents and Utah County residents are happening and where their focus is. Again, some good information as far as number of passengers that they're anticipating. And again, this is a consulting group that's putting this information together. This is economic information. And again, I would encourage you to read through their report. So again, one component that you might want to look at in this particular slide, they're projecting total passengers. It's the second to right-hand column over there, and they're projecting potentially 750,000 passengers through the airport. That's a lot. That's a big jump. And you'll see this in a different form in just a minute here on a different slide. And again, if you run the numbers with some of those fee increases that we're talking about, they may not line up exactly, with the information that is shown on this slide, but they're being projected relatively conservative. If indeed we had 750,000 passengers, the revenue in several of those categories is likely to be higher than what we're budgeting. And again, that's the reason that we offer to come back and make that report to the council on a quarterly basis, or when the council wants that information, we're happy to come back and make that. And I suspect that the budget could be adjusted even mid-year if necessary to account for increased revenue if we saw that coming. So this particular slide, you can see the reason that I pointed out the jump in the passengers. You can see historically since 2013 on this slide, the number of passengers, and you can see a few variations that have gone up and down over those years, but generally a climbing trend through 2022, and then a very big jump in 2023 that's projected. And again, that's coming from assumptions from that consulting team. We don't necessarily anticipate every single one of those passengers that they are projecting here, but we do anticipate a significant increase in passengers. And again, from a budget standpoint, being relatively conservative. So the second question that was asked is about staffing levels. And I just need to review quickly with the council. There's two supplementals here. One of them on the right-hand side is the current the coming fiscal year 23. And as I indicated in the previous presentation, there's 4.5 positions being requested. And we provided some detail to the council. In the previous budget process, there were 2.5. There was the half position in both cases is a wildlife biologist that is tied to the Delta Restoration Project. And I'd be happy to answer questions if there's some questions along those lines. So I'm going to focus on the 2 positions that were requested in the last fiscal year, plus the 4 that are requested in the coming fiscal year. And so those two supplementals, both, excuse me.
Sorry, these are both last year's.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, I didn't have this year's.
Oh, I apologize, Jimmy. Thank you. So I thought the one on the right was this fiscal year. So let me just emphasize in the last presentation, we had the supplemental that was in this fiscal year. So that's the 4.5 positions. I apologize. We didn't get the current supplemental in there. Having said that, though, the staffing level that is being requested, there is a little bit of a report that seems to be coming up in different presentations about the FAA mandating or having some kind of a specific written report on staffing levels. That does not exist. The FAA has come to us and verbally in meetings and in communication with me, they have made recommendations as far as staffing levels. And the staffing level actually is still a little bit low than what they would like to see. FAA has kind of given us a range, and we're still a tad below their range that they would feel most comfortable with. But they've also said, as a bare minimum, you need to have X number of employees, and we're a bit above the bare minimum. So we're kind of in between this point with FAA, and so the question, I guess the sub question that's below the staffing one, at least in my mind, is what risk if we don't staff at the levels that we're recommending in those 2 fiscal years? What risk do we run? And the risk is with FAA running some a concern having, maybe worst case, an investigation or some kind of an issue relative to not being able to either clear the field in an appropriate time frame with not having the right equipment and the right or the right workforce to get the field cleaned, something like that. Maintenance not getting done, something along FAA guidelines. And so that's the risk that we run if we do not staff the level at the recommendation that we have. So I'm strongly encouraging, I think, again, we're being relatively conservative here. We're not going overboard by any means, but I think my recommendation is, and it's a strong recommendation that we staff at the levels that we're recommending. So again, quick reminder, the 2 positions that were funded in the last fiscal year, they have been filled, and we're recommending 4 additional full-time positions. And again, the part-time, half-time biologists associated with the Delta Restoration project. Let me go on to the third question.
We just have about 5 minutes, just
should be done. We're getting very close here. Third question is really about the general fund subsidy and how soon. This is how the question was phrased to me. How soon does the airport become self-sufficient? The way I look at this is I kind of look at it with ladders or stairs that are kind of side by side. And we see this in the previous presentation. I pointed out the general fund subsidy. And if you remember that slide, and I apologize, it's not in here, but over the last couple of fiscal years, over the last 10 years, you've seen that general fund subsidy kind of increase sometimes, and then it works its way back down, and then we increase again. The same thing we anticipate is going to happen. And you can kind of see it in the numbers if you're looking at it. We're going to see this, okay, we have to step up our game and look like and act like a regional airport. That's really what the FAA is communicating to me. And then when we start to see the private sector at the airport doing certain things, and again, you're seeing some of those things taking place, they're going to kind of step up and force us to do something a little bit more. And you kind of see this step by step happening at the airport. And I anticipate that that's the same type of thing that you're going to see in the coming years at the airport. There's certainly other items as you see. Again, this is a duplicate of the slide in the previous presentation. You look at these items, some of them are going to cost some additional funding, some funds in the coming fiscal years. And so there's not really a clear answer. There's not, hey, in this particular fiscal year, we're going to have, zero general fund subsidy. But I think you're going to see the same general trends that you've seen over the last couple of fiscal years. And eventually, the goal clearly for the airport is to become self-sustaining. But it's going to take a little bit of time. And then we're going to have to work with our airline partners and other people at the airport that run businesses at the airport to eventually work our way to lower that general fund subsidy. So I think that's actually the end of the presentation right there. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
any other questions from council? Thank you. This is very helpful. We appreciate your willingness to dig a little deeper with this for us. And I'm sure, as you've indicated, if we have additional questions, we can pose them to you or to your staff.
Yep. Please ask. We're happy to provide the information.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. It looks like you're the next item, so you might want to just stay there. Okay. Presentation regarding the item number 2 on our agenda. Presentation regarding the Lakeview Parkway Phase 4 Interlocal Agreement, also presented by Dave Decker.
Thank you again, Mr. Hanley. Thank you for the opportunity to talk about this interlocal agreement. This is a short presentation, and it's a relatively straightforward interlocal agreement. I have come prepared to answer some questions and explain a little bit about the MAG process. It's probably a little bit more detail than is necessary, but the quick summary is that we have an interlocal agreement for MAG-funded projects that have to be signed. In this particular case, it's county funding that's coming through Utah County, and the standard process is for the cities that receive MAG funding is to have an interlocal agreement with the county that commits the city to spend the money on a specific project and get reimbursement for that project through Utah County. Very similar process happens with state funding. If the MAG funding comes from state funds, we have to have an agreement through UDOT. So this is a very basic, we've done these for, many times, many other projects that are funded through MAG. We have very similar agreements. A little bit more detail about the project that is funded in this particular agreement. It's Lakeview Parkway Phase 4. It runs from Center Street to 620 North, just a little bit south of Provo High School. The total project is shown here. The amount that's coming through the Delta restoration. So this is the component that involves bridges over the river, and you'll see a picture of a couple of the bridges. So the Delta Restoration Project had some obligation to fund part of this project. So that's the reason that the Delta Restoration is involved in this project. And then you can see the MAG funding and also the city funding. There's a question on this.
Cassie,
Oh, sorry. Go
I'm
ahead.
just curious, is this the final stretch or how many more segments do we have left after this one?
So depends on how you want to split them up, because part of the segments of only half the right of way has been paved. And so in parts of it, we have to go back and expand. You'll notice from the airport out to I-15, only half the segment has been built. So we have to go back and rebuild that segment, the north half of the road. It's built and ready for asphalt. It's not like we've ignored, the fact that that's going to eventually have asphalt, but some of them need to be finished. And same thing exists near the high school. We've built half the right of way. So in order to complete it up to 2000, the boundary between Orem and Provo, I think there's one more segment, if I'm remembering, that still needs some work on it. But again, several of those segments will need to go back and finish the work.
What is our estimated year date that it will be totally done?
I think we start on construction of the segment that's there by the boundary. I think we start that not this fiscal year, but the following fiscal year.
So we're estimating.
Year 24. So it runs into 25. And so that's when construction starts. So you have to realize it's probably going to take us a year or so. So we're talking 25, 26 timeframe at best.
Thank you.
So one of the questions that I wanted just to address a little bit, this may because of the budget conversation going on with the council. The question comes up: is the $4 million that city funding that's shown on this slide is it budgeted? And the answer is yes. And this is actually, you can see this was a slide out of the 2019-2020 fiscal year, and you can see Lakeview Parkway and Trail is identified, and you can see each year we're putting in about $1.5 million out of this particular CIP account. And so, yes, the funding for the city portion is budgeted; it's included. And you can see this is the current fiscal year. And again, we're showing just the tail end of the funding here. And this one, this slide shows multiple fiscal years. And then the interlocal agreement authorizes, again, just some general detail. The interlocal agreement from the council authorizes the mayor to sign the agreement with Utah County for reimbursement. And it comes through MAG. Just a couple of pictures of the project. This is not an updated project picture. The project's significantly further along, but you can see Center Street over on the right-hand side, 620 North on the near the lower left-hand corner. The bridge is starting to go into place. This is a more recent picture here going across the existing Provo River channel and the new one that's created by the Delta Restoration Project. And again, a couple of pictures. And that's the end of the presentation. Unless you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything that you might have on this one too.
Mr. Shibley. So September completion on this?
As far as this phase of the project,
Yeah.
I don't think we have it that soon. I think the bridges will be completed, but that segment from Center Street to 620 North, I don't anticipate will be paved and opened until probably spring of next year.
Okay. The CIP says September, so that's why I asked.
I can double check and find out. That seems a little aggressive to me. I mean, these pictures, I actually took these pictures for the presentation. I'm not 100% sure that, you know, I've seen the work recently. It seems like it might be pushing the envelope to have it that soon.
My neighbors are excited, so I get asked once in a while. I hope the CIP is right on this one. Can I ask you a quick question while we've got you here?
Please.
So on the CIP, it also says that the wastewater plant will be completed in 14 years. I just want to make sure that's not
That's a typo.
Accurate.
It sounds to me.
just
Either
says
the one's supposed to show a 2, so fiscal year 24 is when that is scheduled to be
for
done.
phase 1,
Yep.
and then phase 2 would last through 2024, it says. But at the beginning, under the summary, it says it's going to be completely reconstructed over the next 14. So just wanted to make sure that's not the plan there.
Yeah, so the phase of the treatment plant that is under construction, so there's multiple phases. I explained that a couple of presentations ago, but the entire what I'll call the first phase that's under construction right now, that's anticipated to be completed in calendar year 24.
Okay.
As you may recall, we have a 2025 deadline from DEQ to finish that plant and have our effluent decreased. And so that's why we're giving ourselves, about 9 months is what we're anticipating, 6 to 9 months
Room.
of operation so that we can balance it out. So calendar year 24, that plant should be going.
Completed. Thank you.
There are some, as you indicated, there's some future phases on it, but what we're building right now should be done. That $120 million projects that we talked about will be done in 24.
Okay. Thank you.
I apologize for the typo.
It might mean 14 months, right?
It might. I'd have to look at it.
Just seems like a long time. Thanks.
It's not going to be 14 years. So.
I appreciate that.
Might feel like it, but to you.
It does feel like it to me sometimes. Anything else?
She said September.
Just a clarification. So Brian just stepped up to me. The question about completion of this project, we just got staff confirmation. They said fall of this year. So
Thank you.
we'll watch that project.
It's exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Whipple was suggesting a black tie event for that, maybe? All right, thank you so much. We're on to item number 3, which is a discussion regarding the mission statement and committee members and committee chair and vice chair for the council's Natural Resources Committee. I'll just remind the council, this is an adjustment we were making to what was known as the Foothills Committee. Go ahead, Mr. Magnus.
Good afternoon, Council. So last month, we brought item forward to collapse 2 committees into one, to streamline a little bit, and also to deal with the 2 other general plan elements that are coming forward: the rivers and lake and foothills and canyons plans, and also a place where we could have stuff to discuss natural resources a little easier. You voted to create the new Natural Resources Committee out of the Foothills Protection Committee and the Water Resources Committee. The one thing we didn't do was adopt a mission statement or assign the chair and the vice chair. Where we're proposing, this is the mission statement. It was crafted by Mr. Hanley. He's the chair of the committee currently because it was his Foothills Protection Committee that we kind of rolled the Water Resource Committee into. We're also proposing that Mr. Hanley will still be chair and Councilor Ellsworth will be vice chair. And they're the only two members on both those committees, so it would be the same unless there was another council member who wanted to join the committee. So that is what we're asking you to approve today.
And I'll just note, Councilor Ellsworth had suggested just adding 2 words, which I was fine with, to explore policy and budget options. So in that second line, if you can just add "and budget." Yeah. Is there any concerns with this mission statement or the constitution of the committee? Mr. Fillmore.
Yes, as a member of the committee, I just want to indicate I'm fully in approval.
We're not hearing you, Mr. Fillmore. Let's see.
You should be.
Looks like he's unmuted, but we're not hearing him.
George, can't you hear me?
Mr. Fillmore, we're not hearing you. I don't know why. Oh, you can hear him online, but we can't hear him here in the chamber. Hold on just a minute, Mr. Fillmore. I think I hear you.
Hello.
There you go.
All right, thank you. Hey, just indicating as a member of the committee that I fully endorse the wording with Shannon's change.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we need a vote on this, correct?
Yes.
I need a motion.
I move that we accept the new
Mission statement.
mission statement and appoint you, George Hanley as chair and Shannon Ellsworth as vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Counselor Whipple?
Oh, wait, we have a question from,
Mr. Fillmore is on that committee. Yeah. Okay, any further discussion?
I just want to clarify that the other 2 committees will be dissolved and we'll just have this one.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so no further discussion. I'll call for a vote on the motion. George Hanley, will vote yes. Counselor Ellsworth is not available. Mr. Fillmore,
Yes.
Ms. McKay,
Yes.
Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
and Counselor Whipple.
Yes.
Okay, so that is 6 in favor, none opposed with Counselor, 5 in favor, none opposed with Counselor Hoban and Ellsworth excused. I know Counselor Ellsworth is actually listening on YouTube, but she's unable at this point to participate quite yet. So we'll move on to item number 4. This is a potential emergency dispatch center consolidation. Mr. Parker and Chief Jim Miguel looks like will be presenting. Good to have you with us.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. We are excited to bring this concept before you. I need to give you a little bit of background on emergency communications. Currently, there are 4 what are known as PSAPs in Utah County. Those are public safety answering points. Those are the 911 lines that are coming in. They are currently coming in to Provo, to Orem, to Springville, and to what is known as Central Dispatch, which is actually housed in Spanish Fork, but serves most of the North County. We are in an opportunity has presented itself to work with Orem on a consolidation of the Provo Orem dispatch centers into one center. There are 3 major problems that we are really trying to solve. Currently, there is no exact science to how a cell phone hits a tower and comes into the 911 center. You'll find that if you are anywhere in the vicinity of Orem, you could get a Provo dispatcher, or if you are in Provo but close to Orem, depending on how it's just, I can't explain exactly, it's just hitting a different tower, you would go to Orem. So we have got Orem, what we call interrogating Provo emergencies and vice versa. That is difficult because we have somebody else getting all of the details for our dispatcher and having to relay those details to our dispatcher so we can give them to our field units. There is a significant delay in that process. The second one is basic communications. Currently, we are on different channels, Orem and Provo, both police and fire. If a bad guy were driving up State Street, heading north on North State, heading into Orem, we would have to go through our dispatch center to go through their dispatch center to get on the same frequency. And by the time we've actually made that happen, he could be in Pleasant Grove, he or she could be in Pleasant Grove. And so there's a delay in that. And then we have the extraordinary incidents. We have the major police incident, we have the major fire. And our ability, we are each other's support in major incidents for the most part. If we have a major fire in the first alarm assignment, all of the Provo units are there. If we need additional resources, we are getting some of those from Orem. If we have additional emergencies, we are oftentimes calling Orem to come in and stand by in our city to cover those additional emergencies, and vice versa. So we are, there are three. Those are just three problems that we are trying to solve. So we believe that if Provo and Orem were to come together and serve as one dispatch center, that we would improve service levels and response times and communication in the process everywhere that we border Orem. Basically, the north third of Provo and the south third of Orem would be served very, very well by this. We believe that in preliminary studies that there would be cost savings and efficiencies for both centers. Right now, we both have administrative staff in our centers. We both have enough dispatchers to cover a certain number of seats. We believe those seats would be reduced, and therefore we would need less dispatchers. We have been encouraged by the Utah Communications Authority, who is big brother in this particular case, to look to our partners to try to do exactly what some agencies have done. In a city, in a county the size of Salt Lake, they have two dispatch centers. They have Salt Lake City, and they have what's known as VEC, Valley Emergency Communication Center. And they serve all of those agencies up. And so the state legislature, who helps fund UCA and who is very concerned about these communication problems and these call transferring problems that we may be having, they are wondering why in Utah County, with our population and our number of incidents, that we can't actually reduce the number of PSAPs that we have in Utah County. And so we are, and we share those concerns, quite frankly. I believe both agencies do. We have facility opportunities. We just moved out, or in the process of moving out of a facility that's been serving us for 25 years. If you could imagine this, Orem's dispatch center is about a fourth the size of our dispatch center that we moved out of. And we now have the opportunity to move into a new state-of-the-art communications center in our new building, which has been sized appropriately, that if we ever saw the opportunity to grow like this, we would have the space, we'd have the capacity to do so. We believe that, I will tell you that I didn't know this until it became my responsibility to run the communication center, or to manage the communication center. But I don't believe there's a harder job on the planet than being a 911 emergency communications operator. And one of the we have some attraction problems, we have some retention problems, and so does Orem. We've done much better in the last 18 months or so, but we do have some difficulty. And when we have low staffing, we have high rates of overtime, and we have job burnout. We have all of the problems that come with that. And we believe that the attracting and retention of employees would be assisted by this. We have a tremendous level of trust between Orem and Provo. Right now, if we need to get the Provo dispatchers together all in one room, Orem comes in and does our dispatching, and vice versa. The relationship that Provo Fire and Orem Fire have is as good as anyone I've ever enjoyed with one of my neighbors, and I believe the police chiefs would tell you the very same thing. So there's a very high level of trust, and then it sets the stage for other opportunities, if we are successful, other opportunities of collaboration. A couple of the concepts and principles that we are concerned about. It is important that when we put this together, that both cities feel like they've accomplished a win. We want both cities to have the opportunity to look at this and say, we are improving our level of service, we are reducing our costs, we are eliminating a whole bunch of issues that we've had for a long, long time. And we would start with a service contract where we would be the contracting agency, and we would have Orem, whose employees would become Provo employees. We would actually transition them into our workforce. We would ensure that in doing so, that there was certainly no harm in aggregation to the Orem dispatchers. As a matter of fact, we think there would be some advantage to them given our pay rate and given their pay rate currently. There would be some advantage to them coming to Provo. There, we've also evaluated benefits, and we believe there's a very attractive benefits package that could await the Orem employees if they were to come to Provo. Again, we would reduce redundancy and overhead, and again, we believe there are a lot of opportunities for additional service enhancements, and this relationship would help be a catalyst for those. Yes.
I just wanted to ask a question about the Orem employees coming over. We start with the service contract and move toward an interlocal agency. Does that mean at some point Orem is transferring funds to us for what were their employees that are now our employees? So this is no net increase in our own costs?
No, this is no net increase. They would pay and Mr. Parker will talk about the financial piece of this, but they would be paying for this service. It would be the actual cost of them coming in. And then as that evolved, there would be a cost sharing formula that would be established.
Would that be based roughly on calls, for example?
Could be based on a couple of things. And again, I'll let Mr. Parker talk about that, but calls for service and population are two good places to start the conversation. And you'd be very surprised at how, when it comes to calls for service, how similar Orem and Provo are in their emergency services. And then we talked about that. So this is why we are so excited about this from a fire and a police perspective, is that right now we work on automatic and mutual aid, actually mostly mutual aid from Orem and Springville. When things get real intense, when we're on a Friday night, when we're out of units, we don't have any ambulances, we're on our way up to Salt Lake to take a patient up there, we will ask them to come help us, and vice versa. That relationship has been a very positive one. This would make it seamless. This would actually, basically, the way I describe it is, if we were to be operating in the same communications and we were to do boundary drops, both cities double the size of their fire departments, basically, as far as available resources. Improved coordination and joint support. We are, again, I use the example of the person running from the police, or maybe it's a lost child or whatever, and the ability to communicate on the same frequency in two cities, and again, double the size of our law enforcement group that's on the street can only be a good thing for both of our communities.
Councilor McKay.
Yes.
Okay, so I understood that we were sharing, like we've always shared police and firemen when it overlapped to help between Orem and us in Provo. Now, I understood this was looking at combining the call center.
Correct.
But what you just mentioned, so is it going to involve is the idea that's going to involve more cross use of our actual public
No.
safety personnel?
It could increase that just a little bit because communications are much easier. But what it's going to do is take the numerous times that we currently do that and make communication seamless. And that's really what
Gotcha.
we're looking for.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Is to say, I can call directly to an Orem fire unit or to the Orem BC and say, this is what I need. This is what I've got. So it really is about taking what we already do
Doing it better.
and doing it much better. Yes.
So it's not, as far as Provo is concerned, we're not changing the number. We're not decreasing at all.
No.
The number of our public, okay.
No, not at all. Just being able to use, it's not often that we exceed our resources, but it does happen frequently that we exceed our resources. And when that happens, being able to communicate that directly to the units on the street or being able to communicate that directly to the battalion chief that's responsible for the day, it just makes things so simple. And what it really results in is immediate help, whether it's Orem or whether it's Provo. If one of the cities is out of resources, it means immediate resources to whoever's calling for that emergency.
Okay. And I expect with this, if this collaboration happens, that it will affect how we look at hiring in our, as far as dispatch, but it will not affect at all the hiring as far as our public safety people.
No, there's actually, this is just an operational advantage that we have on the street. What we have today, being able to communicate. Communication is everything in our ability to provide emergency services. And so all it does is make that seamless. Okay. As we've said, the first phase is complete. We have met with the leadership, both the public safety leadership and city leadership of Orem. We've talked about this. We have felt very comfortable in the research that we have done. And so what we're hoping to do is come here today and to get your thoughts on the idea. And if that's something you can support, then we move to phase 2. Yes.
I have a question from Shannon Ellsworth, who's still on her way.
Okay.
She would like to know what the downsides are from your perspective.
I right now standing here, as long as we are able to meet the needs of the employees as we come together and provide the work environment that we hope to provide, I do not see a downside.
Great.
Not a single downside.
She's listening online, so she will have heard that.
All right, thank you. Our target would be later this fall to actually do some sort of a functional consolidation where we could figure out how this is going to work, and then move toward the final contract, probably holding off until January 1st or thereabouts. Any true moving over of employees. We are concerned about healthcare benefits. And somebody late in the year that's paid all their deductibles, and then they have to change healthcare, and now all that's been erased. So there are some things that would be very good for the employees if we time them correctly, and that's a huge concern of ours. Mr. Parker.
Councilor Whipple has a question.
Yes.
I do have questions. Most of mine are coming from the white paper that we had. Did you have access to that?
I did, yes.
Okay, I would imagine that you were a big part of that. So as I'm looking in the budget and finance portion of it, so the idea is that we would do a short-term contract is that the final contract that we'd be approving in October?
Yes.
Okay, and then looking to do the long-term interlocal agreement. What do you think the odds are that Orem would not choose to consolidate, that we would need to buy them back out?
I think that as we talked about the upsides, as I think Mr. Parker will probably talk about, their city council is hearing this next week. They've already been given the white paper and they're hearing this next week. And this is one of those things that if we serve them properly, if we take care of their employees, if we accomplish all of the goals that are set before us, I can't see a single downside or a single reason why they would want to they would want to undo something that has great advantage to both cities. And I think they see it that way. And actually, originally, they came to us to have this conversation early on. And so I think they see the facility they won't have to build. I think they see all of the things that will benefit them.
Okay. Yeah, because you can't necessarily predict the future. And I want to know that there are appropriate escape hatches and that the funding will be secure in those cases. Something else that it mentioned are cities that are currently under contract to Orem for public safety services. Which cities are those?
The city of Vineyard gets fire protection from Orem. The city of Linden gets fire protection and police protection, Wayne, and police protection from the city of Orem.
Okay.
The city of Vineyard is served by the Utah County Sheriff's Department as far as law enforcement goes.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Parker.
Thank you.
Chief, thank you very much. This has been a very interesting and actually at moments exhilarating process. I was recalling several weeks ago that a number of years ago, we did a little social media blitz on April 1st, and that's a very significant date, where we suggested that the cities of Provo and Orem had decided to consolidate, and the name of the city would be Provo-Orem, and that we would actually petition to become the state capital because we would be significantly larger together than Salt Lake City is. And we had all of these fun little things we were advancing, logos and all this stuff. We actually did a little graphic where we dropped the state capitol block on top of University Place and talked about what a significant upgrade that would be to Orem's quality of life. And then we got a little tease back from them where they did a video and said, we're all for this as long as we can use our form of government, which is so vastly superior to Provo's. And we got into this little tit for tat process for almost a week, and it was actually a lot of fun. And I actually had somebody comment the other day that who knew we were prophesying back then about some level of intergovernmental consolidation. So my purpose today is to talk just a bit about the results of the feasibility study and the concept that we're advancing, and that we'll kind of use as the basis for the next step in the process. So governance has been a big concern on both sides of the house. Orem clearly doesn't want to get into a situation where they are at the mercy of Provo. And while we have very high levels of trust currently, that's not to say that 5 years from now we might not have seen that deteriorate in some fashion. And so we talked a lot about how do we engage both Orem and Provo's public safety departments, finance, HR, legal, and the administration in general to ensure that we provide adequate oversight on the part of both cities. Neither one of us lose much in terms of the control of this proposal. So one of the things we suggested was we begin with a contract, as we've alluded to earlier, much like the contract that exists between Salt Lake City and Sandy. Those are the two cities that are not part of VEC in Salt Lake County. And Salt Lake City simply is the provider of service to the city of Sandy. We thought that was a good model to start with. It would let us prove the concept. It would avoid spending a very long time trying to figure out what an interlocal agency would look like before we'd actually take the first step. And that we would agree in the contract to work in good faith over a period of 24 to 36 months to create an interlocal agency. And that interlocal agency would have a board of directors that would be appointed by the two cities, and that would make budget decisions, would actually likely contract between the interlocal agency and the city of Provo to actually do the work of dispatching, but it would give them budget authority and a variety of other tools that Orem and Provo both believe would be useful in an interlocal agency. So that process sort of got set aside for the time being while we kind of work out the operational details of a contractual relationship. We would also create a management committee that would be 3 individuals from each city, and any action by the management committee would require 4 of the 6. That was intentional in an effort to ensure that we're making smart decisions that benefit both entities. We'd create a technical committee that would be essentially the police and fire chiefs of both the cities and the center manager. And so that technical committee would make recommendations about equipment acquisition, scheduling changes, whatever operational things might occur in the center to the management committee for final approval. We would create an option for Orem to terminate the contract with a 12-month notice. And our discussion right now has been that they would need to make a decision by the 1st of June of the prior fiscal year. So it'd actually be a 13-month notice. And if they didn't opt within that window, they would be barred from leaving for a full year. And that's just to ensure that at any point in time, we have a full fiscal year between the time notice would be given and a separation would occur. One of the things that's been a little bit tricky is to figure out what to do with Orem's public safety answering point license. The licenses are actually issued by the State Tax Commission for whatever reason. I don't know why in the statute the Tax Commission does that and not the Communications Authority. But nonetheless, we have some work to do with the Tax Commission to ensure that at least for the time period of the contract that Orem has the right to reclaim their PSAP if they're unhappy in any way with our joint operation. And so that's one of the things we need to do now in phase 2 is figure out the logistics around the PSAP. Let's talk budget and finance for a minute. Again, we were attempting to look at a model.
Some questions
Oh, I'm
here,
sorry.
Mr.
Questions on governance. Let's go back. Sure.
Thank you. I am curious. I want to know what the employees think of it. I mean, it must be out of the bag now.
It is
they're
out of the
aware
bag.
of it.
Which is one
So-
of the reasons we're here today as opposed to
Yes.
next week.
As far as our dispatch employees, because it is a really, really hard job. And I know the stress level, turnaround, all of that is like the highest of any job.
It's tough.
So how are they feeling about it, and what is their attitude, and what is the talk at the?
Well, let me let Chief Miguel respond to that. He's met with dispatchers in both cities, so he can give you a little bit of insight there.
This is not going obviously without a little bit of trepidation from some, but the vast majority see this as the next logical step. One of the things I'm grateful for the opportunity to mention, which I failed, is that they have right now they don't have leadership. They don't have a communications director. Our communications director prayers were answered. And we have Heather Perkins, who was named our communications manager about a year ago. Maybe she was acting for a while, but she has turned the morale, turned the operation, turned the communication completely around. And I think that many of them are excited about the leadership that's being displayed here in our center. So we know when it gets right down to it, this is, how does this affect me? Right? How does it affect me individually? We believe overall, they believe in the concept. When their employees are coming over, we just have to take care of some of their personal needs to let them know that we're going to care for them like we've always cared for our employees.
Thank you.
I just want to recognize Councilor Ellsworth joined us.
Thank you. Welcome. I'll talk a little bit more when we talk about human resources, about some of the differences between the two cities and how we would propose to resolve those. So from the budget and finance perspective, assuming we're okay to move there, so we are proposing, we have an existing fund in our budget that you probably have seen as you've been through the budget review, that is our emergency communications fund. Our proposal is to use that fund as the operating accounting entity for this contract. So all revenues coming from both Provo and Orem would come into this account. All expenditures would come out of that account. And then if there is fund balance remaining at the end of a fiscal year, it stays in that fund. So we don't disperse money to the two city general funds, at least during the period of the contract. And we allow there to be a fund balance buildup for future capital needs. The management committee from this
from the contracted service would make a budget recommendation to Provo annually. So you would approve the budget for both the operation of the Consolidated Dispatch Center during the contract period. And that will likely change once we move to an interlocal model. The operating budget would be split 50-50. So 50% of the operating budget would be based on the population served. So we had the question about, what about these other cities that are served by Orem? And so because Orem Fire is dispatched by Central 911, we wouldn't count Vineyard's population, but because services to Linden are dispatched by Orem, we would count them as part of population served. And then Provo's population served would just be our city population. And then 50% would be on a rolling average of calls for service between the two cities. So in order to avoid the peaks and valleys, which sometimes occur, you could have a 10% gain in one year and a 20% drop in the next, that we would essentially do a 3-year rolling average of calls for service, and then that would be the other factor in the financing formula. So we would run this calculation each year, and Orem would write a check to Provo for their proportionate share based on the formula. And then the capital budget, so looking at new equipment that might be needed or upgrades to software, those sorts of things would be split only on a population served basis, because those are not relative to the demand for services. They're just simply the cost of doing business. So that's the general budget and finance arrangement that we've discussed and have a mutual agreement with Orem. Again,
Mr. Parker, just for your awareness, we're over time.
Okay,
So
I'll hustle. So again, review of quarterly reports. Orem City would buy into our dispatch center facility on a square footage basis. So our taxpayers wouldn't be subsidizing the operations for Orem. And then Orem would provide all of their consoles and equipment. So we would not do that as part of the contract. That would be their obligation stepping into our contractual relationship. HR, again, as the chief mentioned, we would be targeting a January 1 move in order to facilitate the change in benefit packages. Sorry,
question from Councilor Ellsworth.
Yeah. How many, and this was probably in the report, I just don't remember the number. How many employees do they have that would be moving over here?
They currently have 22 FTEs. They are not full. We have 26 FTEs and we are also not full. So, but that's how many employees
22 or less by the time we would
Okay.
make the move.
So let's say maybe we get to 50, that'd be great. But do we have capacity in the
Yes.
new building for that?
We do.
Okay.
We do.
And
Yeah, the
how many-
dispatch center was built anticipating at some point we'd either voluntarily go into consolidation or the state would force us. And so recognizing that, we built the center sizable enough to accommodate that group.
How many positions do we expect will be eliminated through attrition?
So that's kind of yet to be defined, but we think it's somewhere in the vicinity of 6 to 8 could probably be lost through attrition over time. Just the efficiencies of being able to be in the same center together. So again, just a couple of other things. Orem employees would retain their seniority status. Seniority is important because employees bid on their vacation time based on seniority. And so we would just essentially weave them into our seniority based on the time they've been working in Orem. Orem would buy out a percentage of their compensable leave balances and then would compensate us for the rest. So for example, they might buy out from the employees all but 80 or 120 hours of sick leave. And then they would pay us for the balances that would come to Provo, so that becomes now a liability for Provo City. So we get compensated for that. We have a difference in Social Security status, and this goes way back in time, but there was a point in time when public sector, public safety groups could exempt themselves from Social Security. And we did for police and fire. Our police and fire are exempt from Social Security today. We did not exempt dispatch. When Orem did their decision, they exempted police, fire, and dispatch from Social Security. So we now have a discrepancy between Orem employees and Provo employees relative to Social Security benefits and Social Security contributions that we would have to resolve. And then again, we think we're able to achieve some salary savings through attrition over time. So next steps, again, is to test our assumptions. So we have to meet with Utah Communications Authority, with State Tax Commission, with the employees who are affected by this. And then we've got to drill a little deeper on the finance and HR issues to make sure our assumptions all work there. And then just to highlight, I think, measures of success as we've talked with our working group. Again, operational efficiencies, improved level of service, reducing response times, especially in the area around our boundaries, freeing up some space in Orem's facilities cost effectively for them, recognizing they're going to be building likely a new city hall. That's getting increasingly more expensive, and if they could fix the cost of their dispatch center with us, then that provides an advantage for them down the road. Creating a model for other collaboration that we might consider doing between the two cities, helping achieve state objectives and reducing total PSAPs in the state. And then if we adopt the formal interlocal agreement, creating a new interlocal agency by the end of the 3-year period, that would be at least in my mind, a measure of success. So with that, it's a lot to talk about, but happy to answer questions, recognizing we're short on time.
Yeah, just a word to the council. We're 10 minutes over, but are there, I think at this point, you just need some sense of our level of support, right?
We want to make sure we don't continue down this path if there's not the political and social interest in trying to work this out. We'd kind of like to know early before we invest a lot more in the process. But I mean, this is, I don't know, the mayor gets emotional about police officers. I get emotional about doing really good things with neighboring cities. I think that's a hallmark of what good governments do, is try to find ways to collaborate. And this one seems to me, certainly not a slam dunk. I wouldn't characterize it that way at all. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm really excited about the prospect, to be candid.
I don't think I've ever seen you emotional, but that would be interesting. Go ahead, Councilor Ellsworth, and then Shipley.
I'm curious, when did this conversation start, and when do we need to have like a consensus by?
Okay, so the conversation started, well, I can say 5 years ago, Jamie Davidson and I had conversations about some level of collaboration, whether it's this or, they were talking about building a southwest fire station in their rapidly growing part of the city. We were talking about a northwest fire station. Why don't we build one station near our border and share the operational costs? And, why build two fire stations, a quarter mile apart? And so that led to some other discussions around, are there places where we could explore collaboration? And so I'd say 6 months ago, maybe 7 months ago, we were having some early discussions about this before the first of the year. And then I think we got really into earnest work in late January, early February, to just think through all the ramifications of this. And so again, very, and again, it was done very quietly, as you can imagine, for some really good reasons. We've seen lots of, I can tell you about a fire consolidation process.
Thank you for the period.
Where the whole thing broke down because small cities in Weber County they couldn't figure out whose fire engine to put in their 4th of July parade. And I had mayors walk away from the system because they weren't going to have their own fire truck. And so we didn't want to create unnecessary alarm if at the end of this process we said, there's just no way this is going to work. And so we were trying to keep it kind of quiet behind the scenes so it didn't die in premature death before we'd actually answered a lot of the questions that would lead us to kind of a phase 2.
And so when do you need a consensus by?
Well, we're going to ask the two city councils to each adopt a resolution of support for conducting phase 2 of the feasibility study so that we get a sense between the two city councils if there's will to proceed on this. So we're going to wait until after Orem's presentation next week before we actually bring you a document, but we would expect to do that in the next several weeks. And again, just a generic, we're willing to explore the idea further. We think there's some potential for success here. And then we'll go ahead and go through our process. We anticipate bringing to you, assuming it plays out, we would bring you a contract for service for your review and approval in October with an effective date of January 1. Assuming things continue looking positive.
We have a comment from Mr. Fillmore. Go ahead.
Just a very brief comment. This sounds like a terrific initiative to me. I appreciate the thoughtful approach that the chief and Wayne have taken. I think this would be a boon to both cities. I know the devil's in the details. We look forward to hearing back from you, Wayne, and Chief Miguel, as you work those issues through. But thanks for taking the initiative on this.
Mr. Shipley?
Just generally supportive. I think it's a great direction. I think some of the most complicated parts of this are going to need to be researched out. The Social Security piece, that's a tough challenge.
Yeah.
One other quick thing, the white paper was fairly, detailed. And maybe this is just my angst about parking at the new building, but we need to add the costs of parking 20 more people at the building as part of a fixed cost associated with having them here.
Yep.
So,
Yep. We'll make sure we include that.
thank you.
Okay.
Councilor Whipple?
Yeah, I'm not going to let you move on yet. Sorry. I'm wondering, do we have numbers on how this will affect this year's proposed budget?
So after January 1 budget, we will know a lot more about that by October. And our proposal would be to bring you a budget resolution to make adjustments to the budget once we have a lot more answers. And so again, we've got to work all the way through the financial model. We have some issues around calls for service. The two entities count calls for service a little differently. And so we have to kind of get getting apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. So there's still a fair amount of work to be done before we can really estimate the final budget. But yeah, we would need to do a budget amendment before the end of the year to make that effective January 1.
Okay. I mean, this sounds like a good idea. It'll be interesting to see how you work through all the details. I will say I'm a little disappointed that we're only hearing about it after it was leaked to other employees and that it had to come up to us kind of like as a last minute emergency thing.
Well, our entire process was really about, as I explained in email, was really about trying to get everybody in alignment so that we told the story all on the same day. We were trying to avoid getting one city council ahead of the other or one group of employees ahead of the other. And so we were on a path to do all of this in one day, and it would require either Orem or Provo to have a special council meeting to make that happen. And as soon as the word got out, unfortunately, as it played out, we had Orem city employees starting to run to Orem city council members and say, I don't know the details of this. I'm panicked. Do I even have a job in 3 months? What does this look like? And so the Orem council started finding out about this before you did, and we felt that was absolutely unfair. And so we wanted to hurry and get this before you so that you didn't get it through the back door. You didn't start having Orem council members calling you and saying, what the heck? And how come we didn't know about this? And so again, we were scurrying at the last minute, and I apologize for that. That was not part of the plan. Our hope was to kind of meet with the two dispatch centers, the two city councils, and the press all in the same 24-hour period. And again, that just, unfortunately, the stars didn't align as we hoped. So,
Well,
so that was our desire.
I certainly feel for you because nobody wants that situation. Although I do think that it would have been good to bring us in earlier since we are a decision maker with budget and things like that. Yep. So if you were only planning to bring us in 24 hours before the press release, it seems like that would have been a little bit late too.
Yep, understood. And as you can appreciate, some of these projects, as I mentioned earlier, can develop in ways that are really unhealthy if you're not really cautious about what you say to whom. We had a very, very tight, small group. I mean, there were like 5 people from both cities who were diving deep into the exploration of this. And we brought finance and HR in at the very end, just like a month ago, 6 weeks ago, to try to work through some of these, differences in benefits and salary schedules and so on. And so it was done to try to prevent, with all good intent, to provide what actually happened, to avoid what actually happened. And again, sometimes the longer you go, the harder it is to keep things under wraps. So, and again, we don't have, given the constraints around closed meetings, we really didn't have the opportunity to schedule a closed meeting to sit down and go through this, in some detail with you because it didn't qualify. And so we knew we were going to have to say it in a public setting, and we were trying to minimize the risks and maximize the upside, and it just didn't play out that way.
We're way over time, so let's make it quick. Counselor Ellsworth.
I'll just add to Councilor Whipple's comments. If the administration needs to share something with the council ahead of a public meeting, they can set up meetings with our staff, like 2 or 3 counselors at a time.
Yep.
I'm okay with the way this unfolded. I think it's important that you had those conversations ahead of time, because otherwise I would not have wanted to, I would have had more questions than you had answers. So I think that's what I understood you were trying to do, is get those answers. I guess at this point, we will wait to see a resolution. You're still giving us the opportunity to say yes or no to this.
Absolutely.
You're not asking us for an increase in budget. So that's also something that I respect here, because otherwise it could have been a more dramatic decision. Anyway, that's just my feeling about it. But unless there are counselors who want to speak of any serious reservations about this, we'll look forward to having that opportunity for further discussion and vote when you bring back the resolution.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay. Chief, thank you. All right, we'll go to item number 5. Mark Ayo, our council intern. Did I pronounce your last name correctly? Close. Tell me how to get it right. Ayo?
Ayo.
Ayo. Okay.
Well, greetings to the council and to the administration. Maybe I'll just introduce myself real quick.
Please.
I'm Mark Ayo, born in the Philippines, moved to Hawaii, and spent the last few years here in Provo for the BYU MPA program. Just, grateful to be here. Maybe like a trivia about the Philippines is it's a very religious country. It's known for like 3 biggest religions. It's a Catholic country because we were colonized by Spain for 300 years. So it's Catholic, growing members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So the church is second, and third is basketball, followed by volleyball and boxing. So I may not know our country's GDP, but I know Utah Jazz All-Star Donovan Mitchell averages 25.9 points per game this season. So we're going to talk more about numbers today. So my purpose for today is just to present a comparison of our council's mayor and city council budget expenditures, comparing it to other Utah cities. So, I have this, sorry. Okay, so first thing we did as a team is we tried to compare apples to apples. We tried to look at different cities with the same, mayor council form of government. This 4 are what we found, to which have slightly similar form of government with us. We found Sandy, West Jordan, Salt Lake, and Ogden. So I'll be quick. So in comparing these numbers, and in order to identify if we're like too high or too low when it comes to this budget, we'll look at the different adopted budgets of these 4 cities. So according to this table, the budget allocated for the city council for the year 2022, Provo City ranked 3rd among these 5 cities. This is according to the adopted budget. For the budget allocated for the mayor's office for the year 2022, we ranked 2nd among the 5 cities. For the number of FTEs in the council, we ranked 5th among the 5 cities. For the number of FTEs in the mayor's office, we ranked 2nd among the 5 cities. And feel free to ask any questions if you have. Of course, we use different metrics to also identify our status. We use dollar per resident. So what we did here is we added the total budget of the mayor's office and the council's office and divided it to the total number of FTEs from both offices and divided it to the total number of population for the city of Provo. So here's our conclusion. When an individual resident in Provo pays tax, $1.32 goes to the city council and mayor's office budget. In this case, Provo City is 3rd in ranking among the 5 cities mentioned above. Okay, Rachel and Rachel. Sorry. I don't know how this works.
We're looking at the numbers on dollars per resident, and it looks like Provo is second on your chart. So we're
Oh.
curious about how you got third.
We rank second. We rank second. Sorry, it's like I think I made last minute changes and the colors didn't follow. So yeah, we rank second in ranking among the 5 cities mentioned above. Thank you. Now we also looked for the council plus mayor's budget over general fund to see how ours compared to the general fund. Again, this is my conclusion. This is the percentage of the sum of the council and mayor's budget from each city divided by the general fund. Provo City, let me check. Yes, we do have the highest percentage among 4 other cities at 4.67%. This means that Provo allocates the most from its general fund for its city council and mayor's office expenditures compared to the 4 other Utah cities. Next, I focus on the council over general fund. So among the 5 cities, Provo is only second. Yep, second to Ogden when it comes to the amount from the general fund that goes to the city council's expenditures. Provo City uses 1.77% of its general fund for city council expenditures. Next, mayor's office. So among the 5 cities, Provo has the highest percentage of amount from the general fund that goes to its mayor's office expenditures. Provo City uses 2.90% of its general fund for the mayor's office expenditures. So this is for the mayor's office. And finally, tax dollar per FTEs. So how we did this is we added the total budget for the council and the mayor's office, divided it to the sum of the total FTEs. So here's what we found. In this case, Provo City has the highest dollar per FTEs of $152,204 for the city council and mayor office. So dollar per FTEs, we have the highest. Check that again. Yep, we have. So any questions or recommendations for future research that we could do for the council, for the admin?
Okay.
I'm curious now, what you talked about the general fund here. Now, are cities like Sandy, for example, or other cities, are they funding their council and mayor by things other than the general fund? Or are we totally comparing apples to apples?
Based from what I've researched, according to their adopted budget, most of them get it from the general fund. So, John?
Yeah, I did the initial research on this. The problem we're so skewed is our general fund is the second smallest. Other cities have much larger general funds, so it skews how we place on those things. And the other problem is the mayor's FTEs are higher than most cities, but that is because of the media services that are put into that office. So even though we're comparing apples to apples general funds, the outlier is our general fund is smaller and there's more FTEs because of media service in the mayor's office, which drags this number skewed. But we were asked to present this as how do we rank with other cities. The only thing we could do is go back there and try to pull media services out and then give you another one. There's no way to fix the general fund. That we're always going to be the highest. It's just because our general fund is so small.
Right. So the point is that we're not comparing apples to apples, which is obvious even through the numbers, how they skew themselves from.
Right. Well, even though we are general funds, total FTEs, population, all the demographics we usually cut the data into. And I tried cutting it a million different ways to see if I could skew it back another direction to make it see if we could smooth it out. There just isn't. So comparing this to other cities is hard, and the value of it, there's not much value in it because of the media services, unless we cut them out. And we'd have to go through line by line to figure out what they cost and pull them out. But we still will be skewed because our general fund is so small.
Councilor Ellsworth?
Can you go back to one of the earlier slides? I think it showed how many FTEs that each council office had.
Oh, this one or?
Earlier, it showed a number of FTEs. I thought it did. Earlier.
There it is.
Yeah, FTEs in the council. So 8.7 FTEs, does that include counselors?
Yes,
Like at
that
a
is total
point-
FTE. So the counselors,
What's our percentage? Am I 0.1 of an FTE?
I think, no. So in our office, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 FTEs.
Mhm.
So the counselors make up 3.7 FTEs. So
Okay.
about a half each.
No, that's not true.
And then we have an intern who doesn't quite count as a full FTE either. So you guys are running about a half FTE.
Okay, so this also includes the other cities' counselors, right?
Yes.
Okay, and we're quite a bit lower. I mean, Salt Lake's an anomaly, but we're, I guess, a little bit lower than West Jordan. They're just starting this form of government. And Sandy and Ogden are probably better peers for us. I just wonder if someday soon the council needs to consider the staff's limitations and capacity and the needs of the council and future councils, and see if there's another mechanism or need to add an FTE or to restructure in some way.
Right. We didn't dive into the FTEs to see what each position was at the different cities. I mean, that's something we could do, see how they actually allocate their FTEs. This was just kind of a down and dirty, quick summary. Like I said, because of our how our general fund is, we just can't. It's not a good comparison. This data, while it's interesting, is kind of useless.
Okay. Well, I still think that's a worthwhile conversation for this council to have, because I want to make the lives of future councilors easier and set our city up for success in the future and make sure that we're not overburdening our staff. So I think that at some point there's a conversation to have.
Right. And just to let you know, with the election of the new mayor in Sandy, she's reorganized the mayor's office, and there's more FTEs in that office now than there have been in the past. So even Sandy's increased their cost. We just don't have this year's budget.
Are you saying you have inside information at Sandy?
So maybe my comments related. I mean, it's the wrong time to ask this question because we're down a full-time executive director, but I haven't prior to this season with when Cliff was in his position every year, seemed to me we were okay with where our staffing was. So do you feel like, does the staff feel like we need more staff?
There's some changes on the horizon to some programs. That's a discussion that we can have after we get through those, to see some of how some of the functions in our office.
Okay.
Maybe we do need another part-time FTE to help with some of this.
I mean, I'm not terribly interested in this data. I'm more interested in whether or not we feel like we have what we need in the office. That's where the rubber meets the road. So if the sense is we're doing okay for now, then we're doing okay for now. And if we need to make an adjustment at any given year, we can. But
George, can I add here? I think that there's probably a conversation for the council to have about our needs and expectations and how much time do we intend to spend on this and what does that mean for staff, and what programs will change or could change, or what could be added or what could be subtracted. And maybe we always want an intern, or we always want 2 interns, or maybe there's other ways to consider the communications that our office puts out. Maybe it's more budget, maybe it's more FTEs, but I think we kind of need to evaluate what our status quo is and what current conditions and desired future conditions are, and then understand the FTEs and how they play into desired future conditions.
yeah, I'm just saying, I don't think comparison data like this helps me get to the answers to those questions. I think it's just simply our own ground level needs.
And we could talk about that. Let us get through budgets.
Yeah.
And get the new executive director hired, and then we can talk with leadership about how the office functions and where do we go from here.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Ao. I wrote A-O so I could remember. Yeah, and we'll talk basketball at some other point. All right, item number 6, a presentation regarding utility rates, property tax rates, and fees. This is slated for 45 minutes. We're 12 minutes behind John Magnus, Interim Council Director, Executive Director.
Well, we have some extra time built into the end of this meeting, so even though we're running late, we'll be fine. So last week we talked about taxes, property taxes. This is the other side of the coin. This is about fees and how we structure them, how we collect them, how we get them back from the public in general, and what are we using for. 1 second, I need to get my spreadsheet up from my. Is that the first screen? No, it is. Okay. So why fees instead of taxes? This screen is purely an academic exercise. When I say you're excludable, I'm not talking about we're excluding groups of people. Excludable means the ability to tell someone they can't use it, can't have it, just can't be there. I'm not trying to exclude a group. It just means it's like your house. It's a private good. You can exclude people from coming in, and it's your right to do so. And just like that, that's why we call it a private good. You can exclude people from using it. Exhaustible, that means it will run out. If I go fishing and I catch a fish, that's a fish you can't have, but I can't stop you from fishing. So it's exhaustible, but not excludable. Why this matters is this is how we determine what should be paid through taxes and what should be paid through fees. So anything that's a private good or a private resource, usually we like to capture that back in fees. If it's a public resource like police and roads, we usually capture that and pay that for through taxes. Public good, local governments usually don't deal in public goods. That's like military clean air. It's a little beyond our scope. Private resources, you can exclude people from using it, and technically it's not exhaustible. I've always argued that it is because you can run electricity, but they always say you can build another power plant, therefore it's not exhaustible. So usually utilities get thrown into this private resource. You can exclude somebody because you charge them for the energy they use. It's not exhaustible. You can build another power plant. This is just the kind of academic research that we break up into to figure out how resources work, how we pay for them. So I just want you to understand, so when we're talking about fees, we're talking about everything that's above the line, everything that is excludable and says, yes, we consider those fees. Doesn't mean everything is perfect. You look at a public park, that is a public resource. You can't exclude people from going there, but it is exhaustible. You can only put so many people in the park before you can't put another person. It is possible for a park to be a private good. And at a moment in time, we rent out a baseball diamond to a group. That becomes a private good. They can exclude people from using it because they have the right to, and it's exhaustible. We don't have an unlimited number of baseball diamonds. So you can see where you can watch public resources move around from a public resource to a private good. Like I said, this is just an academic exercise, so we know how, when we talk about fees, we're trying to capture everything above the line that is excludable. Because if it wasn't for the public wanting it, we wouldn't charge a fee for it, and we wouldn't be here. That's the government wouldn't be operating in that realm, and if we're not operating in that realm, we would be private enterprise would be working with it, and we wouldn't have to deal with it. A golf course is a perfect example. Private golf courses all throughout the United States. There are public golf courses, and it acts like a private good. So we have to make sure that who is ever golfing is actually paying the fees to capture all the costs for that golf course, that is not being paid out of the general fund. Does it happen? Does general fund actually pay for public or private goods or private resources? Yes. An airport is considered a private resource. Even though it's publicly owned, it fits in that category of a resource. And this year we are going to use general funds to help backfill the shortage. And that's a policy statement. That's what we're saying. The airport is important enough to us that we're going to spend general fund monies instead of capturing all those costs and the fees. We're going to augment it with general funds to keep it going. So when we look at fees, we have fees for services, golf course, building permits. Anytime someone wants to come in and work with the city, renting a baseball diamond, renting city property, we charge them a fee. Fees for commodity. These are the utilities, water, power, sewer, solid waste. We charge for commodity. And those fees are structured a little different, but those are basically two fees that we look at and we deal with year in and year out. Fees for service. And this is the one that's important for us. We supply building permits to the public. They come in, they want to build a house or they want to build a subdivision. If it wasn't for them wanting to build that subdivision, we wouldn't be in the business of giving them building permits. If nobody is building, the building permits would go away, the department would go away. So we need to capture all those fees. When we talk about fees, capture them all, there's direct cost, which is their salary and benefits. That's what we actually pay the employee. And the indirect cost, it's the cost of business, it's the computers, it's the software, it's the supplies, it's the rent for the office space, it's for the maintenance, and it also includes the supervision of that person. Indirect costs, these are them, the office supplies, computers, software. Basically, if you look at a city's or a department's budget, you'll see their employee costs are broken down. This is their salaries, these are benefits. Anything beyond that is an indirect cost to that department. Whatever it is, it's an indirect cost. And it's easy to calculate. You can just take off the salary and benefits. What's left, you add up, and that is the cost to run that department. Fees for commodities, when we look at this, is also important. There's the fixed costs. These are operation and maintenance. This is the day-to-day operation, making sure that the systems are working to get the water or electricity or the trash being picked up. The maintenance, the system has to be maintained. Trash trucks, then you have the oils changed, tires changed, repairs done. So there's a maintenance cost. Another cost that a lot of cities don't capture is the replacement. There's a lifespan on all our systems. Trash truck will only last so many years. So you build that cost to replace it. So when the time comes and it has to be replaced, you're not trying to raise your fees to capture the cost to pay for the new trash truck. Your fee structure should have been in place that after a lot of time when that trash truck is gone, you have the money in a reserve account to pay for the trash truck to be replaced. Yeah.
That was something I was wondering. So we do have specific reserve accounts for depreciation or capital improvements?
We have capital improvement. We have capital improvement accounts, yes. And they should be capturing, that is a place to hold these funds.
And they are specifically saved for capital improvements and not?
Yes. How you, we didn't dive in. I can't tell you how each department puts their, captures the cost for replacement. We all know right now the sewer plant is, we're ratcheting the rates up yearly considerably to pay for the sewer plant that wasn't paid for in the past.
Right.
That's what happens if we don't catch the replacement cost. At some point, it will catch up with you and you will have to increase your fee substantially over a short period of time instead of doing it gradual over a long period of time. Now, that's the trade-off. You're going to have to pay for it no matter what, and it's how you pay for it. And then there's the variable cost itself. It's the commodity. These things, if we don't sell electricity, we don't have to buy electricity. If we don't pick up trash, we don't have to pay dumping fee, tipping fees. So these are the costs that are variable. These are usually cost in some ratepayer. We charge them per kilowatt. We charge them per trash can. This is not the base rate. The base rate should carry the top three costs, and the variable cost should be cost in another rate, however we want to write it, energy cost, water, however they wanted to come up with the cost that is the secondary cost. So you should have two pieces to this equation. One is a base rate, covers the top three, operation, maintenance, replacement, and you should have another cost for the commodity itself, which will vary depending on our prices back to us. So we talk about indirect costs and how we calculate it. This is the hardest one for people to understand. I came from California. Raising revenue is almost impossible. Act of God in Congress, and you still don't stand a chance of getting a tax passed. So we have really leaned into cost recovery. All the jurisdictions I work for, everything is cost recovery. And how that works is a little flow chart. You have a director on top. You have his salary and his benefits, his indirect cost. Let's say his salary and benefits are $50 an hour. Indirect cost is $5. So his total cost is $55 an hour. Now you have no one to charge it off to because he doesn't interface with the public. He's not a frontline worker. So what you do is you take his cost and you divide it by how many people it supervises. In this one, we're saying 2 people. So you look at the managers, their salary and benefits, $35 an hour. Their indirect cost is 5. It's going to be the same for everybody. And then you have the supervisor's cost, $27.50 an hour. So their total cost is actually $67.50 an hour. But again, they're not interfacing with the public, so there's no way to capture that cost. So you have to drop it down one more time. And we look at frontline worker 1, $25 an hour in salary and benefits, $5 an hour for indirect costs, $33.37 for supervisor's cost. That comes out to $63.75 for total cost. And that will track all the way back up the director. So you take the director divided by 2, the manager has two below him, you divide it by 2, frontline workers picking up a quarter or a third in this case of the director's cost and half of his manager's cost. This is total cost recovery. Now,
John, let me stop you for just a sec, real quick. So an example of what we looked at last year for this particular scenario is parking. So when we were talking about getting additional parking enforcement officers, we were talking about their FTE cost, right? Their hourly cost. And we were trying to say for cost recovery purposes, this is how many tickets they'd have to, this is how much revenue they'd have to generate in order to basically justify that one additional person. And the reality is there's more to it, right? And we know there's more to it, but I think John's doing a good job of explaining, like, we can actually calculate it too. We don't have to just stop at the actual person's recovery of their hourly. We can back this up and get to the real number.
You can start the mayor's position and work your way down, realizing at certain points you're gonna hit dead end. You get into the police department, there's no cost recovery built into the police department. We know what the costs are, but there's no one to charge, so it's a dead end. But where we have forward-facing public, where they're coming to us for a service like a building permit, we wouldn't be there if they didn't want the building permit. And this is what it costs for us to actually generate a building permit. It's this whole cost structure. It's not just the person standing at the counter, their hourly wages. That's not what we need to recover. We need to recover all that's cost from the manager, from the director, all the way down to that frontline worker. The cost should be absorbed by the person using the whatever we're doing for them. The costs aren't recovered through fees are going to be backfilled to the general plan. So if the golf course is not recovering its total cost, we have to backfill it in with general fees. We have to do our general fund. We have to do a transfer in. What we're saying is that all those public resources and public goods that we fund through taxes, we're not going to fund some of that. We're going to fund this private enterprise. And we're going to backfill. And that's not a bad thing. That's just a policy statement. The airport is a policy statement. The council wants an improved regional airport, and we're willing to pay out of the general fund to see that happen. It's not a value statement. It's just, this is a policy statement. This is what the council's decided going forward, that is an important policy to pursue. And that's just something that we have to be aware of when we're talking about fees and cost recovery. If we don't recover everything, what we're saying is, it's okay for us to take this private good or private utility and help offset the cost with general fund revenues, tax revenues.
So I just want to point out that when we make decisions about building more roads or develop more neighborhoods and build more infrastructure, we have a similar problem. It's almost worse in a lot of ways because there's so many indirect costs or long-term costs to the maintenance of a lot of the things that we're paying for, trying to pay for through impact fees and other things, but it only gets us the present road. It doesn't ever pay for the road to be maintained for the next 50 years. So there's a built-in, some critics have more cynically called it a Ponzi scheme, but there's a built-in unsustainable model in terms of the growth of a city that we also have to be aware of. I just think that's important when we're making decisions about development. We assume that we're getting revenue, but the costs are not always covered.
Right. Your revenue you're capturing compared to your costs aren't equal. And next week, we'll go over that with the whole property, why property taxes and this go hand in hand with each other, why it's so important. What?
Your laptop's bumping the mic.
That's what's making that noise. There was like a little bit of a vibration. Yeah.
So just realize if it's a private good or private utility or a private good and we're paying for it, it's just a policy choice. And that's your decision to make on how that gets funded or if it gets funded. So we went through the fees for the last 5 years, put them in a spreadsheet, calculated, we carry them across to see what were changed, what weren't changed, who's making adjustments, who's not making adjustments. We all know inflation is running higher. We have a 2.5% every year with 2.5 merit raise. So fees should be adjusting accordingly. And the other thing is we didn't dive into each fee structure, so we don't know exactly if they're cost recovery, how much is cost recovery. We are just looking at what has happened in the last 5 years. Administrative costs, these are kind of blueprints, getting copies for blueprints, records, grammar. The only thing about grammar is that's set by state statute. We can only charge what the state says we can charge. But like police records, fire records, we charge for those things. And for the last 5 years, they have not increased. They've kept them flat. Airport fees, for the last 5 years, they've all increased. The airport department is doing a very good job of maintaining, keeping their fee structure up to date, capturing their costs and trying to offset their losses from the general fund. It should say this includes FY23. This fiscal year, they have more lines because of the terminals coming on, so there's more fee lines, and they have made some substantial increases to their fees in the last 5 years. Business license, these are all the business licenses we charge for. No adjustments in 5 years. None. They have remained flat. Now, we can offset some of that cost if we're actually generating more business license, and therefore we get more money in. Might offset some of that indirect cost, but I have a feeling it's not. Take a deeper dive to actually look at what it's actually costing the department to process the license and their revenues. Cemetery, they have increased a few of their fees. Cemetery is a weird one. It's kind of like a private utility with a lot of private good built into it. And we have to keep it in perpetuity. So it's a little disconcerting. Out of the 40-cent fees, only 13 have been adjusted. So probably need to look at that, make sure that their balances are right. So when they actually do reach build out, that they do have the funds to maintain the property in perpetuity.
Hey, John, sorry, I'm thinking, I'm still on your business license. It takes me a while. So again, this would be a policy issue that if we're not raising fees on businesses to get licenses, we're basically saying, look, we're going to subsidize the increases over time through, tax funding basically. And we're basically as a council saying this is a public good to have more businesses at a lower cost to come to Provo as opposed to our neighbors if we've got something competitive like this. The interesting thing for me is how much do the business license costs actually deter or attract businesses? That's something that I'm not sure I know.
And neither did I. Didn't dive in that research. Like I said, we were just taking a very quick look at 5 years worth of data to see have they been increasing their fees. If they haven't,
and these are obviously really different too. The difference between like a rental dwelling license, obviously, and like a small business owner trying to come and operate a small. I mean, that's pretty different. Those are different, very different things.
Right, and these fees vary greatly between them.
That was my question, is like, what's the range basically? What's the high and the low? And I'm sure they're variable and you don't have to give me exact numbers, just curious.
Let's see, that's key.
A newsstand, if I was going to open a newsstand.
So a general business license from 0 to 5 employees is $125, and 100 plus employees, it's $800.
$800?
Yeah.
That's probably the high end on this list.
Yeah. Right. Some of the beer licenses are expensive. The bonds for them are expensive. Most of them are pretty cheap. So
pretty cheap, like $50?
100, 300, 150, 120, 200. So they're all over the board, but they're they shouldn't be cost prohibitive to the business.
Okay. Yeah, I'm just curious, and you wouldn't know and we wouldn't know, but I'm sure everyone had every licensing fee had a different path to that number, and there's probably not a standardization across fees, and fireworks stand next to a Christmas tree stand could have completely different fees. Not that you should put those next to each other ever.
Well, a fireworks stand would have more inspections. Fire would have to go out there, so there are more charges to
I
it.
see.
So we would expect to see, depending on how much we have to interact with the business, would increase the fee.
Okay. Interesting. Thank you.
City Hall rentals, they haven't increased their fees for 5 years. I would imagine since we're moving out of this building, that's probably going to change. They were disturbingly low, $15 an hour for setup. I don't think we have any employees that work for 15 unless they're part-time. So are we giving away? I don't know how much we rent the place out. Like I said, this is just a very cursory look without actually going and asking the departments themselves, hey, is this a fee? This is a correct fee. How do you pay? What's that $15 an hour? Who's working for that? So, and by that model, we could see that $15 an hour doesn't begin to cover the rest of the supervisor's cost. Community development, they haven't adjusted theirs in 5 years. There's an hourly component to some of the fees, but they don't list what the hourly fee is. So we can't even check to see if they have been ratcheting that up to match with the salaries have been moving up. Engineering, they've kept their fees pretty flat, but they're pretty substantial. Like I said, I'm not passing judgment on anybody's fee structure. I'm just saying 5 years, they haven't changed it. They do have an hourly rate that they've instituted in 23, but they have not changed it since then.
Can I pause again? In all of these cases, has it been the history? I mean, maybe I should know the answer to this myself, but is it essentially the expectation that when departments believe that they need fee increases, they come to us? But what you're sort of underscoring here is that we haven't really comprehensively looked at fee structures as a council to the degree where we are running the risk of subsidizing a whole bunch of practices that maybe we don't want to subsidize. And there may be some that we do.
Right. And that is a policy decision.
But are we just, has the pattern been that we just are relying on departments to tell us when they feel like their fee structures need to change?
I would think what it is, the departments are probably looking at the hourly rate of the employee doing the work and not looking at total fee cost recovery, the indirect costs, the supervisor's cost. I think they set it at that. Now, remember, under law, we can only recover our costs. We're not supposed to make money on anything that we do. We charge a fee for. We're not a private enterprise, so we can't make a profit. We break even. Are they breaking even? I don't know. We haven't really dug that deep. I was just looking at 5 years of fee cost, and they haven't increased their fee cost. A lot of like engineering is plan check. They do have a cost for capping the asphalt at $1.25 a square foot. It's been the same for 5 years. Oil prices have moved, so I don't know if it still covers their asphalt. I don't know how often they look at their fees. That's something you'd have to ask the departments. And I think next year when we do our budgets, that would probably be a question we'll want to ask is, do you have fees and have you looked at your fee structure to recover your costs? Because it's just from what I can tell,
right?
for 5
Because
years,
if they're not adjusting them, but their costs are going up, then they ask for more funds from the general fund, then we're subsidizing I don't know if Mr. Borgett or Kelsey have any thoughts on this. I'm just curious to know if we're being as systematic as we should be about making sure that we're not just hitting the general fund every time when in fact maybe some of these costs, I don't have any sense. I mean, some of these seem so minimal that it probably can't be a matter of a few extra dollars, right? Literally, that we're going to get from a Christmas tree stand fee adjustment, but some of these might be significant.
Yeah, could we do better? Yes. I think one of the things that the departments I know what they've done traditionally is they've kept in tune with what neighboring cities or similar cities or organizations to us to make sure that we're in line that way. but they should also be reviewing their costs. And I know that there have been situations where we've brought fees, like for example, the business license fee discussion. I don't know how many years ago it's been, Wayne, but I would guess it probably 6 or 7 years. We paid a consultant to come in and analyze business license fees, and they looked at things like what kind of service calls do businesses have. A couple examples: pawn shops, grocery stores, businesses like that had a lot of police calls, a lot of fire calls, a lot of other things. And they went through and looked at all these service calls. And what happened was they came back with a proposal for fee adjustments for business licenses based on what it's costing the city. And some businesses were big losers and other businesses not, just based on that analysis. And the council looked at it, and we had people coming into the council, these businesses that fees were going up 200, 300, and 400%. And they were just really upset about it because they wanted to be competitive and see how this was fair. And so the council basically stepped back and decided not to adjust the fees at the time. So there's always difficult circumstances, but I think we could be more systematic. I think John's point is some departments are better than others. Maybe we need to be a little more centralized and make sure that we have a process where we check to review to make sure the departments are looking at and I don't know if they look at them every year, or if we have a process where they should look at them every other year or every third year, but we could be doing better. But anyway,
it's very helpful. I mean, when we think about the inflation of the last recent while, right, it seems like at least in an economy like we have right now, maybe yearly is called for in a lot of these cases. Maybe others it's less relevant, but
it's interesting. We just received I don't know what they call it, an audit update from the state auditor's office, and they're highly concerned that there's a number of cities throughout the state that are charging fees that are higher than what their actual costs are, and they're kind of going through and making some very stringent updates and things as far as so the bottom line is that fees need to be looked at to make sure that we're not overcharging or undercharging. They should be based on what our costs are.
Okay, thank you.
So I told staff I'm either going to be the most hated man after today, after I go through everybody's fees and tell them that they haven't moved them enough. Fire department, they haven't changed their fees in 5 years. They did change some of their inspection fees to an hourly rate, which is better than a flat charge because then they're actually capturing how much time it actually takes to review the plans. I clipped this out. So this is 5 years. 2023 is on the right. This is this year. This is our standby rates we charge. And they haven't moved in 5 years, even though we know our costs have increased for the firefighters alone, because we gave them a substantial bump last year to bring them back in line with what's happening around the city. And yet we don't see that translated into the fee increases this year for the standby charges for the firefighters and their equipment. General inspection. This one's tied to the 1997 UBC. UBC is the Uniform Building Code, the fee chart. 1997 was the last year UBC published a book. They joined with two other corporations, and it's now called the IBC, International Building Code. So they haven't moved since 1997. So Library Academy, they have been increasing their fees for the room rentals, which I gather is probably their biggest moneymaker. They have kept pace with that. The rest of the fees have remained flat. And this could be one of those policy issues. You want kids to go to the library, read books. So we might, that'd be something that would be a policy issue why we would backfill if we had to do a fee transfer.
Well, just a note on specifically the library, not a policy issue for us as a council because none of their funding comes from the general fund.
Right. Yeah, they're solely funded. But you do pass their budgets, and you want to make sure their fund balance isn't shrinking too much. But they have done a pretty good job increasing their room rentals, which, like I said, it appears to be their moneymaker. The Parks and Rec Covey Center, for 4 years, they haven't done much. This year, they have changed all their fee structures. They've increased it, almost everything up and down the board. They were charging $17 or $15 an hour for an employee for setup. They've increased that. I still don't think it's cost recovery, but at least they did adjust for it. And they adjusted the rest of the rates in this year. East Bay Golf Course, there's been no adjustment for the last 4 years. But this year they have gone through and they've not only raised rates, they've also redone their fee structure. They've gotten rid of some of their discounted rates that they had. They have these things called punch cards. And they got rid of some of the upper end punch cards because those gives you like the range balls. If you buy more punch cards you buy, the cheaper it gets for a bucket of balls. And they've cut off the top end of it. So they've redone their fee structure and they've also increased their rates for this year. Parks Pavilions, this one was a mistake. It's not blueprints. These are pavilions. When we rent them out, they increased all of them this year, and they have been increasing them over time. This is not a static one. The Parks and Rec, the memberships haven't changed in 5 years. They've increased the daily pass rate for $1 for each category this year. Senior centers, they've held flat. The rentals, they've increased this year. Swim lessons, they've increased. The 60 plus classes, they have increased, and all the community classes have not increased in 5 years. And that could be totally fine that maybe they have not increased. People teaching the class aren't charging more. Like I said, I didn't dive into it. I was just looking to see what they've done for rate increases. The Provo Shooting Park, they restructured in 22 and they increased their rates. The adult sports, they've been adjusting their fees and dropping programs that aren't making money. So not only do they adjust their fees to increase them, but they've also adjusted the program itself to get rid of a few of the programs that aren't funding. Youth sports, they've held flat pretty consistently. They made some adjustments in 23 and they made some adjustments this year, but not substantial. Again, this would be probably one of those policy issues. Youth sports very popular. It's probably something that, the Parks Department does a very good job of generating revenue, so they're just backfilling this with other revenue they generate. Sports field, they made some substantial adjustments this year to their fee structure. The Peaks Ice Arena, again, they didn't adjust for 4 years, but they have made some major adjustments this year. They have increased some of the costs for the sports teams that are coming in using the facility. Parking permit areas, these are all set. These fees are set by ordinance. We can't do anything about that unless you want to go through and change the ordinance to change the cost. All of them are $15 except Carterville. That one is $100. The police, they charge for a false alarm, pet licensing. That's set not by us, but the animal shelter. Bicycle license they do for free now. False alarms, they haven't changed the rate on that or the structure in the 5 years we looked at it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What does a false alarm entail?
So if someone has an alarm system tied to the police system and it goes off, we will send a police car to the location.
Okay, so it's a literal alarm.
It's a literal alarm.
Okay.
And you get the first, I think it was 3 free. And after that, they start ratcheting it up.
I see. Okay, thanks.
Culinary water. The customer service fees have increased over time, but the rest of them, the water connection, tapping, and reducer fees have been static for 5 years. Energy utilities, the one thing I noticed about that is the residential rates for the connection fee, the service fee itself has increased year over year. They're doing some wholesale changes this year. I don't have the new stuff yet, the new fees yet. They're still working through those. But in the fee document that we're going to pass, you'll see there's lots of red lines. They have gone through and redone most of their fee structure for 2005. Sanitation, there were some fee changes in 20 and 22, had to do with the actual residential curb pickup. For 2023, we're holding it flat. For the commercial rates, they've held it flat for 5 years. So the residentials are paying, the commercials haven't increased. And the only concerning thing about this one this year is their fuel costs have had to go up. But we don't see, it's not translating into a rate increase, which water district I used to work for, we had what's called a rate stabilization fund. We took part of our fees and set it aside into a rate stabilization fund. So if we had a spike in the commodity, we would pull out of that fund to smooth off the rate increase for the customer. And then when the commodity would drop back down, we raise our price a little to recover the fund. So that could be something they're doing without looking at their fund balance. I can't tell you exactly what they've done, but there are times where utilities will do that. They will cover the cost in the short term to see if their charges or their fees go down themselves. In this case, it'd be fuel. If fuel drops, they might just use part of their fund balance to get them through the year. Wastewater, we all know about wastewater. We hear about it. This is the last year of the adjustments. Impact fees, these we were adopted, and these are set by state ordinance. We have to do a study. That study was adopted a few years ago, so that's set by that. And Justice Court, those fees are set by the state pretty much. The judge has some latitude to either increase or decrease the actual fee itself, but that is beyond our control. Questions?
Questions for Mr. Magnus?
Go ahead.
What are your recommendations?
To look at the fee structure, make sure we're actually doing cost recovery, full cost recovery, and that we're not overcharging. Because if we haven't raised our rate in 5 years, either we were overcharging 5 years ago or we're undercharging today.
Sure.
So we'd look at everybody's fee structure or have them look at it and report back to us that yes, they have cost recovery. And what is their cost recovery? Just salary and benefits, or is it everything? Supervision, indirect cost.
So just basically the council issues a policy statement that we want each department to evaluate fees and a program for cost recovery and bring a report
Something probably before the next budget cycle.
next year.
Next year.
Right.
We're too far gone this year
Yeah.
to actually go back through and have them do that, but that would give them enough time for the departments who charge fees to actually look at it. Like I said, Parks Department does a very good job. Energy does a good job. There's just a few that we've seen. The utility part of ours does a very good job. It just seems there's a few departments that have been static, and they really need to address that.
Is there ever a time when we don't want to raise fees, even though they're not meeting costs, like library fees?
Library fees, the airport, we can't raise their fees right now.
Okay. I'm just wondering, is there some of that gray area where we wouldn't necessarily?
It's all gray area.
Oh,
It
yeah.
depends where you draw the lines.
Okay.
So like if there was a spike in energy costs, we could use general funds to smooth, well, they could use their fund balance to smooth that cost out in the short run for the ratepayers, so they don't have to bear the brunt of it. That would be a policy decision. So yes, there's always a place and time where it is appropriate for general fund to make a transfer in to help with the fee.
So is it not current practice that in the preparation of the budget from each department, they're looking every year at their fees?
They submit their fees to finance.
Okay.
That's all I know. I haven't, like I said, we didn't do a big deep dive into this. We just kind of flew over the top to see what was happening. Are fees being adjusted? Are they capturing inflationary costs? And it's a mixed bag. That's all I can tell you is some do, some don't.
What has inflation been over the last 5 years?
Excluding this year?
Including this year.
I haven't rolled the average for this year in because I do it in May and the May number isn't out yet.
What do you think?
Rolling average for the last 10 years is 2.99. This is really going to drag it over 3.5.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I'm just wondering maybe with Kelsey and John here, if that would be an onerous thing to incorporate into the budget process, just to have some verification when we're getting the budget presented to us that they feel confident that their fees are covering their costs or not. So that's part of the budget process, so that we're confident that when we're getting asked for any increases, we know that they're not increases that could be covered some other way.
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is right now, I mean, departments are expected to review their fees each year. And we have a process where we go through and we update the consolidated fee schedule to reflect that, and that's included as part of the budget. Are some departments better than others, as John's mentioned? I think it's definitely true. I think we could have, I think John did a really good job of talking about how a lot of times, if you look at the labor costs, it's not just the labor cost of the employee. You could also factor in the supervisor and go up as far as you wanted. But if we had, and maybe even had more of a standard of what our formula is. I know we did this a few years ago, Wayne. I think it's probably been 7 or 8 years ago when council had a similar discussion, and we tried to come up with a standard formula, and it wasn't, it helped some, but I don't know if it was really successful. But I think it would be good if we had kind of a standard formula that we wanted to follow, and then we could ask departments to review those. I guess the other question would be, it's a pretty extensive process. And as like I mentioned earlier, whether or not we ask departments to review maybe a portion of their fees each year rather than all fees at one time. That could be a pretty big process. The other thing that I really feel like is that the directors have a pretty good sense, where their fees are and where they feel like they could be moved to. They're sensitive to issues related to, how it's going to impact residents, how we compare to our neighboring cities. But I think all that needs to be factored in with cost recovery information. And so I think those things could be discussed and looked at, but I do agree with John. We would need to be planning for next budget year because it's a pretty big process.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Other comments or questions? Thank you, Mr. Magnus. Very helpful.
And then the next meeting, I will tie property taxes and this together and show you how to help make this city more recession proof.
Okay, so we will now take a 10-minute break and reconvene at 2:40.
Recording stopped.
All right, good to know.
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We'll continue with our agenda. Item number 7, which is a presentation regarding budget increases from fiscal year 2022 to fiscal year 2023 by Malia Daly, our policy analyst and chocolate supplier. I don't know what inspired Malia to provide these wonderful chocolates, but we are grateful if it's buying our vote somehow.
Well, actually, I told Travis I would bring him some, and then he's not even here. So now it's just for you guys.
Okay.
His loss.
We'll make sure there's none left by the time he
Sounds good.
gets here.
Supposed to be Travis as well.
Okay. So we're gonna go over the expenditure and revenue changes, both for general fund and non-general funds. Also important when we're going through these, and I mentioned it in the memo. Once again, the memo, this presentation, and all the data is available publicly, and then also in the packets. But one thing to keep in mind is the supplemental request that we went over last week and expenditure changes in non-general funds. So just for context when looking at these. The general fund revenue, it's kind of small, but hopefully you can read all those numbers. So these are all the different sources in which the general fund gets revenue, including the transfers, which is that second column there. And so that first line for all of the charts is going to be last fiscal year, last year, and then this projections for this coming fiscal year. And then we have the change in actual dollars amount and percentage. Red indicates that there's going to be a decrease in revenue. But overall, as you can see on that last column, we're actually going to have an increase of about 10% in revenues and transfers into the general fund. We've gone over these numbers in past presentations, so I don't want to rehash anything, but does anyone have any questions kind of looking over this chart and all these different sources and of revenue? And questions might come up when we look at expenditures on the next slide as well. So next, this is very small, just because there's a lot of expenditures from the general fund. So again, FY22 on the top, FY23 on the bottom there, and then the change in real dollar and percentage on the bottom. And red again is indicating a decrease, black indicating increases there. So total expenditures, I want to bring your attention to that column. Total expenditures increasing by 6, but as we saw on the previous slide, revenue and transfers increasing by 10. So that is a good sign. We do have decreases in expenditures in a couple in admin services there in the recorder and finance. If you look at specifically on their pages in the budget book, you can kind of see where that decrease is coming from, just from various costs within their offices. They're not huge decreases. And also, IS gained a cybersecurity, or IS gained an FTE from finance.
So,
Kind of-
Malia,
Yeah.
sorry, I have a question.
Of course.
So given what Mr. Boria was saying earlier about the philosophy of estimating revenue low, that gap between 10 and 6% could be even greater.
Yes.
So I know I've asked a similar kind of question in the past, Mr. Borget, but and I know this is sort of like, it's not a science, it's an art, trying to guess what's the most reasonable but conservative approach. Do you feel confident that I guess the question is, are we being overly conservative in our estimations? And would that give us a little more wiggle room to be?
So if you go back to the previous page, which shows revenues, I mean, really the big piece, the elephant in the room is sales tax. Okay. And you can see that right now we're projecting a 20% increase. And as I mentioned earlier, right now we're forecasting a 15% increase from the 21-22 budget so far this year, 8 months through the year. And so if that comes in at 15, then we're budgeting for a 5% increase on top of that. Okay. Now, as far as whether I think that's over conservative, no. Do I think do I feel comfortable with it? Yes. We couldn't be over conservative and have the benefit of giving our employees a 5% COLA because we feel like that's really important. I don't think we're being over optimistic, but basically I think we're in a pretty good place. Do I think our overall revenues will come in above? Yeah, I'm relatively confident that they will, but I would not be comfortable being any more aggressive in what we've got on the general fund right now.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thanks, Sean. So again, going back here.
Sorry, we have one more question.
Go ahead, yeah.
She might answer my question. I was going to say, obviously, you're going to explain the engineering decrease. It's the one that stands out.
Yeah, so engineering decrease goes with, and John might come up and help explain part of this too, but that also goes with just the different projects we're building this year, different expenditures that kind of go with all the construction that is happening in this past fiscal year.
So I guess my question to that is that, usually when we're looking at general fund expenditures, we're talking about primarily FTE and operation, not usually talking about CIP but engineering could, we have more expense in engineering, but
If our finance team has an answer, I'll let them answer. If not, we can get back to you.
thanks.
So engineering has a couple of components. I had to check on this. Our engineering department that's part of the general fund, what that primarily is just their compensation and some operating expenses. And I would be shocked if that went down by 2 million. But we also have our engineering capital improvement fund, which really depends on funding that's coming in and the size of projects. And so if that's related to the CIP, it makes sense. We'll check on it and see. It probably is. We'll let you know.
Yeah, on that, looking at the budget that they gave us, the $4.7 million is the total expenditure in the original budget, but the 2.71 is only the engineering administration for the tentative budget. So they're two different items that are being
That would be
compared.
why. Just a mistake on my part then creating that. Thanks, Rachel. Counselor Whipple. That's helpful. Okay. Moving then on to non-general fund revenue. I just put descriptions of all these different funds because that's helpful for me. So it just kind of helps keep in mind what these are for. Same format as the other ones there. Big changes, CIP, once again, different. We don't have as big as we're not having a new terminal, a new city hall, things like that. And then transfers in. That is broken down more in the budget book with line by line, like these specific transfers for every single fund. And so that's not all just one big lump sum, but it breaks out across all of those different categories. So you can see that in the budget book more specifically. So I can't really have a general statement to those. But are there any questions regarding revenue for non-general fund funds? If not, this is non-general fund expenditures. So again, the CIP for the same reason as revenue, just big construction projects that are not going to be continuing in FY23 or ending shortly into it. Enterprise funds, there is a big increase there. But that also includes the airport, so that makes sense. Other increases, as you can see, internal service, employee benefits, insurance, computer, all of those things have pretty sizable increases. Again, in the budget book, you can see those specifically detailed out, but it adds up to a pretty significant increase overall for that fund. And then does anybody have any questions on these? If not, that is the end. But like I said, it is really helpful. The memo has some more detail in this, and then also in the budget book, really looking at those line by line, and you can compare. Finance has set it up really nice so you can compare across the years, and you can see specifically where things have been added in, and then they have good explanations for context of all of those increases and decreases. All right, that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, Malia. And just like that, we're ahead of schedule. I will continue to item number 8, which is a presentation regarding transfers in the 2023 fiscal year budget. Dan Follett, Finance Division Director.
Thank you, Chair Hanley and Municipal Council, for the opportunity to talk about transfers. State law requires that we notify the utility ratepayers of any transfers we plan to make that come from the payment of utility fees. And we accomplish that with a mailing that goes out with the utility bills every year. And so if you have received your utility bill in May, this mailer was included in there. If you haven't received it, it should be arriving sometime throughout May as the various billing cycles are mailed out. We make several transfers, essentially 6, and I'll talk about each one. The first one that we have done for as long as I can remember is a 10% utility transfer, and that 10% is 10% of utility fund revenues, and it's similar to a dividend. All of the utilities within Provo City, and I'll name them: energy, water, wastewater, sanitation, and storm drain, they're wholly owned and operated by the city. The city has built those utilities over time, paid for those utilities over time, and those utilities belong to the city and ultimately the residents of Provo City. And so the 10% reflects essentially a return on investment or a dividend to the city and to the ratepayers for those utilities. And those revenues are utilized primarily to support general fund services. The most significant, of course, being police, fire, and parks and recreation, along with some other general fund city functions. This also helps keep property taxes lower throughout the city and spreads the cost of services over a broader base beyond property tax, but throughout the ratepayers also. For the upcoming budget year, 2023 budget year, this particular transfer, the 10% transfer, will be $12,343,150. The next transfer, which began in 2013, is a 1% transfer, and this was set up to enhance available funding for road maintenance. And that transfer, again, is 1% of utility fund revenues, and the amount for the 2023 budget year is $1,234,316 that will go directly towards road maintenance and improvement. The third general fund transfer is an administrative overhead transfer, and it's just more efficient to have legal, human resources, information technology, and finance be administered on a citywide basis rather than each individual department having those various functions within their department. And so to the extent that those services are provided to the utility funds that I mentioned earlier, there is a transfer associated with that to pay for those services, and that the amount of that transfer, the administrative overhead transfer, is $1,476,204. And then there are 3 other transfers that take place. There's a telecom debt service transfer, and that totals $3,250,000. This is funded by a telecom debt service fee within the energy portion of the utility bill. So for residential customers, you see a $5.35 amount on your bill each month. That amount goes towards this telecom debt service fee, and it's repaying the telecom bonds that were 20-year bonds. Those bonds will be fully repaid February 15th of 2026. And at that point in time, we would anticipate that fee would no longer be charged to the utility customers.
Sorry, real quick on that.
Yes.
Don't we have a reserve balance that could pay off about a year? Isn't there like there seems to be a fund balance for that particular fee that.
Yes, there is. And to the extent that to the extent that we had more money than we needed before February 15th of 2026, I believe the plan would be to pay down that bond and discontinue the fee at an earlier point in time.
Perfect. Thanks.
The next item is what's known as Provo 360, and the amount for 2023 is $235,136. What this represents is we are amortizing the implementation cost of Workday over 5 years so that it didn't hit all the departments all in 1 year. And so we're in the second year of that 5-year amortization. Once it's fully amortized, that particular fee would also go away, transfer. And then the final one is water. And this is the management of both water and wastewater. It's the same individuals, the same group manages both of those. The cost for that management group sits in the water fund, but yet they provide management services for the wastewater fund also. So this is simply a transfer from wastewater to water to pay for the wastewater management services, so that both funds accurately reflect their actual cost. So in total, the total transfers for 2023 are $19,122,626. I'm open to take any questions that the council may have at this time.
So on administrative overhead, we're talking about what these enterprises, what shows up as chargebacks, right, to these enterprises. Is the Provo 360 and the administrative overhead, are they lumped together when we look at an enterprise budget, or are they separated out?
The Provo 360 is simply the amortization of the Workday implementation costs.
And they are separated.
They're separate,
Okay.
yeah.
And then as far as how we determined what the administrative overhead is, I'm sure there was some kind of formula to what they use for each one of these departments. Is that just something that finance determines for each department what that chargeback should look like depending on what they use?
Well, yes. When you say finance determines, in conjunction with each department, they work very closely and essentially agree upon these charges with each department where it relates to cost. I mean, the 10% transfer and the 1% transfer, of course, are calculations based on revenue.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Yes.
I have a question about the 1% road transfer. Has that always been the amount?
It has been 1% since 2013.
So this goes to our earlier conversation about adjusting fees. I mean, that's not exactly a fee, but it is trying to cover costs that we don't cover in any other way. But if we haven't adjusted that in 9 years, is Public Works satisfied that that's sufficient for our pressing needs for road repair, curb repair, all the things that we hear about all the time?
I don't know that I'd be comfortable answering for Public Works.
I mean, I'm assuming that's, they have other, this is extra, is it not? Or is this the entire budget for road repair?
No, this is not the entire
Right, this is
budget
just
for road
extra,
repair.
yeah.
This is over and above. And my understanding is that this amount is designated 100% to repair as opposed to salaries and benefits or any other administrative type costs. This revenue goes directly towards repair and maintenance of our streets.
Hmm.
But it has not changed since 2013, so.
That being said, Mr. Chairman, I think as we think about the utility rate increases that have happened since 2013, this is probably expanded way faster than inflation because it's 1% of the utility revenues. And so again, as we've provided for capital improvements and other things, it has probably increased quite a bit faster than inflation.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Other questions? Okay, it's just a lot to think about. Appreciate that presentation. It's very helpful. We did just get a rather detailed email from a citizen about the mailer that went out, and I hadn't seen it, so I didn't know what was in it. And to be able to answer that question, those questions, I don't know if you're the right person to get those answers from or send this person to.
Yes, I'd be happy to answer any questions that residents may have or ratepayers. They're welcome to contact me.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. Wow, cruising along here. Maybe we should go for a trip down to the lake after our meeting, before our evening. Get some kayaking in, go birding. Okay, item number 9, presentation regarding transfers in the fiscal.
title's
Oh,
wrong. Yeah.
sorry,
No, it's just the title is just budget priorities and tentative
budget
budget.
priorities. Okay,
We just
Malia, item
made a
number 9.
mistake on the chair notes for you there.
Okay,
Okay, so this is a presentation ahead of, on June 7th, between now and June 7th, we're going to work on budget intent statements with everyone on the council, and what the council would really like to see done with the budget, and kind of give direction on changes that they're going to be making. So in preparation for that, staff, we've put together this report about budget priorities, which we discussed in our April 19th budget work meeting. I believe that was the date, or April 12th, and then the proposed tentative budget. So this is just a kind of brief comparison of those two to get you kind of thinking about changes that you would want to see in the proposed tentative budget and budget intent statements. So these are the council priorities broken down into the different categories. These are taken directly from the letter that's included in the budget book and was sent to the mayor with the priorities for the proposed tentative budget. So you have the housing inventory audit for public safety, additional police officer for specific neighborhoods, street lighting, government administration and operations. There's some with cybersecurity, employee retention, general fund reserves, Parks and Rec with the regional sports park, and then public works, and then transportation. Yes, Shannon.
question.
I think I have the same question. I'm wondering if we captured the improvements at Slate Canyon and at Rock Canyon.
That is in, right now we have a draft of the letter. We haven't finalized it. We've been a little behind on that one, but yes, that is in our letter.
Okay.
We'll make sure that gets in there.
Was that your question?
I was just calling on you. So I didn't have the question
Oh, I thought you
formulated
said you
yet.
had a question.
No.
And this is also a time to review the priorities. And if there's anything that you think we're missing or you want to add, we definitely can do that. So this is by no means final or all that we can look at.
Yeah, we've mentioned that a couple of times, so please don't neglect that. Slate Canyon and Rock Canyon.
The other thing I think we should reconsider is increased street lighting in the Joaquin neighborhood. It's probably, no, I'm saying it's not exclusive to the Joaquin neighborhood, right? And so what we might need to do is put an asterisk by that item and say like safety measures for a campus adjacent areas or something.
Yeah, definitely we can make that edit. Yes.
I also want to understand with IT if what we're doing, my understanding is what we're doing does not cover keeping us current on our backups and patches.
That's correct.
And that concerns me. So I'm wondering what it would cost to keep the city up to date on backups and patches.
That is something that we can reach out to IS and have that conversation with them. And I think that's also included in some of the supplementals. There's some more specifics of that.
It's included in our packet. I think it was like 40,000 for an update manager, Avante, if I'm not mistaken. And it's part of the packet, but it was like $30,000 or $40,000 that was not funded. Is it easier for us to do, are we just anticipating as a council doing appropriation request once we know what technology we need in our room, or should it be part of this budget?
That is a question
The Zoom
for
room?
John.
The Zoom room, we're going to pull out of the CARES Act. So what that was the discussion was pulled. We have an appropriation from last year, which will carry over, and any extra we'll pull from the,
I had a question about the officer, and I don't know if Mr. Parker has an answer to this, but I felt like, first of all, I think I mentioned this before, that came from a conversation that Councilor Ellsworth and I had with some students, with the police chief and with the police chief of BYU Police. And, he wasn't pushing for it. He just said, well, if there was an extra officer, that could go a long way in helping to prevent a lot of crime in an area where a lot tends to happen. But we haven't had any follow-up conversation. It's not been a request. I would just like to get his perspective on, because I think there was also an issue about whether or not he had looked closely enough at the data to determine the desirability or the urgency, I guess, of that particular position. And I don't want to presume urgency if it's not there, but on the other hand, if there's a need, I know he was also, as a brand new police chief, feeling a little bit hesitant to ask for the moon, but if that's something that's a real need and he feels like it's that would be very well used, we would like that information. That would help us quite a bit.
Yeah, I'll chat with him and make sure we're going there. I think his, as we talked about it initially, I think his concern was it would be good to define what the outcome is that we would like, and then we can figure out what the right strategies are. So if it's a question of, feeling safe at night, that's probably part police officer, it's probably part lighting. It could be, if it's burglaries from vehicles, then the 9 p.m. routine approach is, just go out and make sure your car's locked, folks. Stop being quite so trusting living in the BYU bubble. Recognize that, everybody who walks down your street is not a BYU student. And so again, there are a lot of, I think, strategies around once we figure out what exactly the outcome is that we'd like to have. So, but I'll follow up.
Yeah, I remember him specifically saying something about the really powerful deterrent effect of a police officer who's regularly parked in the neighborhood, who's visible enough that people say, "Oh, there's surveillance here."
Yep.
And in the absence of that can create kind of an invitation. Anyway.
Yeah, I'll follow up with him.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's also true in every neighborhood, right? I get a lot of emails that people want the police always there for speed areas or for safety things. And Dixon has safety issues out of that. I'm curious about, as far as BYU, what's the jurisdiction of their police? Are they allowed to leave campus? Can they monitor Joaquin better? Or are they not allowed to do that?
Well, just a couple of things. So I think we talked not too long ago about this idea of what do we do on the fringes between BYU's jurisdiction and our jurisdiction. And our effort has been to not create gaps, but to create more overlaps. So BYU police, clearly their primary mission is to patrol the campus. But they are sworn police officers, those who are sworn police officers. not part of security, but of BYU PD. And so they can perform police duties anywhere in the state of Utah, just like the Spanish Fork officer, if he sees a violation off duty in Provo, can exercise police powers. And our police department occasionally finds their way to the BYU campus for a variety of things. So I think the idea of having both police chiefs in the room to have that conversation about concerns in the Joaquin area, I think that's perfectly valid. It's the right thing to do. I doubt that we would see BYU spend a lot of police resources off campus, just like we don't expect to provide a lot of police resources on campus. So I think it's our primary responsibility to take care of the area in Joaquin where there's the potential for some overlap. If we have a police officer assigned to an area, it really takes 5 to do 24/7, 365 for vacations and shift work and other kinds of things. So again, if you're trying to focus your resources, there may be a time when there's a little bit of a gap that would be helpful to have a BYU PD officer drive through or sit there for a bit. So again, I just think that's, once we figure out, again, our desired outcomes, and I'll visit with the chief and see kind of where he's at in his data analysis, and then we can come up with a strategy that accomplishes what you want to do.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was kind of where we left it off. And like I say, I felt like we had pushed our role as far as we could go, and we felt like they needed to talk to each other and determine, the needs for surveillance, because that seemed to be where, as you point out, where Provo police are in a better position to park a car in that neighborhood on a regular basis, whether it needs to be just a few hours a day or whether it's constant. He didn't seem to know either, based on his preliminary information. But I would just say, in terms of desirable goals, I think, we've already mentioned it, but one is the safety of that's a very, very high number of vulnerable citizens who are walking at night, compared to a lot of other places. And so it's that securing that safety. And also he's mentioned, I know Chief Ferguson had said that earlier, in terms of petty theft, that's one of the highest places in the city, if not the highest, right? So,
yep.
Yeah.
Can I just add here, maybe just for the sake of your spreadsheet, maybe those two are just combined and we say a more generalized line item is that we want to or what would we put? Just the funds would be
that first item kind of covers it.
Increase public safety around BYU and predominantly student neighborhoods. There you go. Yeah, that's the one.
Okay, definitely. And like I said, this is all in preparation for budget intent statements and really tackling the budget more tangibly than just reports and presentations from staff. And so this is all really good feedback. So if you have more feedback after this, not during this presentation, please reach out to us so we can help you and work on that with you.
And I think we'd want to get it a little more specific before we pass the budget, so we're not just putting, I don't know, X number of dollars towards more tweets about the 9 p.m. nightly routine, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then
oh, I have one other thought about transportation.
Go ahead.
So we have a public meeting tomorrow night about Timpview Drive.
Yes.
It's the opportune time to have the conversation because they're going to be repaving the street, but I don't believe there is funding currently for any of the major improvements that are being explored. So I don't know if whatever the outcome of that is, if it becomes something that's desirable, where are we going to come up with the funds for that?
I did talk to Public Works about this, and it wasn't communicated well, but it was never intended as options per se for eminent use on Timpview Drive. It's used as a study of the options as citywide issues where it is needed. And that's something that was definitely not communicated that I didn't know until I spoke with Gordon.
So it doesn't have to do with the fact that Timpview is being repaved? I thought that was...
It does in the sense that they could mess up the road and be repaving it soon. You know what I mean? Like all the lines they did, all the chalk art, It's just a good time to play with a road that's going to be repaved. But no, they have no intention of doing anything else on Timpview Drive except repaving it. But it's making citizens aware of and have them experiment with options that can be used throughout the city as a whole.
I'm confused because I thought, I mean, I'm certainly aware that it would have value elsewhere, but I thought it was specifically to address some safety issues on Timpview Drive.
That's not what I was told by Gordon Haight
Huh.
and Rob Hunter, who came and talked to me in person on Timpview Drive yesterday. But the thing is, there's streets that are much more dangerous and have much more higher incidences of speeding and accidents way before Timpview Drive. Timpview Drive is actually one of the safest streets in the city, they said.
Well, that's to be, I'm sure, sorted out. I'm just, I'm totally confused because I thought this study was intended to get data about Timpview Drive.
It is going to get data, like they keep track of, number of vehicles and speeding and all of that. But there is zero intention to make any changes on this road. And it was done more as a general educational.
Even if the data shows that it's desirable, they're not going to do it? I don't understand.
It'll be something we slated later, but it's not going to be.
I thought the point was to take advantage of the repavement, though.
No, that was not the intent. It's taking advantage of the repavement in the sense that they can play with the street and paint it and do all these things that are going to be covered.
But it's cost effective. If you're going to redesign a street, you do it.
But they're not redesigning right now. They're literally just repaving. Like the redesigning will take millions of dollars.
I'll have to talk to them because that's
like
not what I understood.
The roundabout itself is over $1 million, if they were to do such a thing.
Well, I know. Yeah.
And so, yeah.
And they wouldn't even want the roundabout where it is in the temporary location right now anyway. But that was the only spot where they could set it up as the demonstration. If they were to put a roundabout on Timpview, it would have been at a different intersection.
Well, clearly I got to get clarification on this. It's very confusing. Well, and I think that was, there seems to be an awareness that it would have spared a lot of heartache if there had been more communication ahead of time about what was the intention. So hopefully going forward, we can avoid that. But all right. Any other issues about council priorities?
I think it might be worthwhile if we revisit our priorities from last year and see what we got from the money that we allocated last year. And I remember that code enforcement was pretty high on the list, and I think parking. And it'd be interesting to see what outcomes have been produced since then, and are we satisfied with them? And just following up and being consistent on our priorities.
I think there was an intention, at least with regard to the parking administrator, to present to us sometime soon, correct?
I don't remember all of what our priorities were last year. I think it was parking, code enforcement, and police, maybe. But it'd be good to revisit those since I can't remember them. And maybe Dave Shipley remembers every single one and knows exactly how they're performing. Okay. So that would be a worthwhile conversation.
We have the list. We can do a report for you at the next work meeting.
Thank you.
All right. No further comments? Well, what do you know? If there's no objection, we will now adjourn the Provo Municipal Council meeting by unanimous consent.
To the lake.
Record.